Chapter 478. Bi Tianxin slightly narrowed his eyes, his gaze growing sharper and sharper. He had not expected that his opponent would still act so unbridled, even though he knew his background. He had come to the capital this time to take care of business, but he had unexpectedly discovered that an elder was in some trouble. In addition, he had heard the names of the Orthodox Academy in Changsheng too many times in the past year, so he was very disdainful and naturally refused to accept it. So he had appeared. Guanbai had given Changsheng a year of time, but he did not have this sort of patience. As for whether this was bullying the weak or not, he did not care. It must be known that his life had always been smooth sailing, his talent outstanding, his background astonishing. No matter where he went, he was respected. Back when he was traveling through Xuanyang City, even Liang Wang's son had been polite to him. Even if that madman painted armor Xiao Zhang did not like him. Because of his family background, he had never truly made things difficult for him. Who could have expected that today he would encounter such an opponent that did not play by the rules? I know that you're very angry right now, but you can only endure it. What can you do? Do you think you can kill us? I just don't understand. Just what right do you have to act so high and mighty in front of us? How old is Yushio? How old are you? How old was he several years ago? What's there to be proud of in defeating him? Think about when you were your age. Just which one of us could you defeat? The first half of these words were precisely what Bi Tianxin had said to them, and now Tang 36 returned them. Are the storms of the 8 directions very arrogant? In other places, you might be able to order them around, but I'll have to trouble you to open your eyes and see where you are. He pointed behind him at the Orthodox Academy school gate that was still brand new after a year and sneered. This is the Orthodox Academy. This is the Wenshui Tangs. This is Su Li. This is the Orthodoxy. And this is the 3 Saints. I've never liked to talk about my background because I think it's very childish, very shameful, but I just happen to be like you and like to talk about these things. The problem is if you talk about these things, do you think you can win against us? Upon hearing these words, Bi Tianxin's face paled, because he suddenly realized that everything the other party had said was true. Even that senior had to advance step by step and be cautious in suppressing the Orthodox Academy. He had been a little impulsive. However, he was still a member of the Proclamation of Liberation and was the descendant of 2 storms. Now that he was forced into a corner by Tang 36 words, how could he retreat? His face was pale because he had thought it through, and also because he knew that he had to do something. Otherwise, his reputation and that of his family would be severely damaged. His right hand had unknowingly grasped the hilt of his sword. Chun Changsheng stood in front of Tang 36, his right hand only a short distance away from the stainless sword. He stared into Tang 36's eyes, his gaze focused and calm, showing no intention of backing down. Xin Yuanpa had already made his preparations for battle. He stared viciously at Bi Tianxin, his usual simple-mindedness replaced by the berserk aura of a demi-human mutation. They all knew that if Bi Tianxin moved, he would assuredly be the strongest person the Orthodox Academy had encountered since the all-school martial exhibition. Moreover, if Bi Tianxin really did attack with killing intent, no one knew what the result would be. In front of the Orthodox Academy, there was a deathly stillness. The people had already dispersed, and the atmosphere was extremely tense. Tang 36, however, was not the least bit nervous. He stepped out from behind Chun Changsheng and said to Bi Tianxin, "Think clearly about the consequences of casually attacking here." He then turned to the Li Palace priests and Orthodoxy cavalry and yelled, "What are you standing around for? Don't you see that your future pope is about to be killed?" He had naturally shouted these words for Bi Tianxin to hear. At the tea table in the house, it was still those 2 people sitting across from each other. Truly childish. Mao Qiu gazed at the activity going on in the distant Orthodox Academy, but it was hard to tell if he was talking about Tang 36 or Bi Tianxin. He was keenly aware that Bi Tianxin's parents had a very close relationship with Daoist Siyuan and Linghai Zhuang, just like the relationship between Zhu Luo and Guan Xinka and the deceased Archbishop Mei Lisha. He was also keenly aware that while Bi Tianxin was praised by the common people as someone who could calculate the hearts of others, in the end, He was just a young master of a noble clan who had been spoiled. Otherwise, before he appeared, how could he not have thought that these youths of the Orthodox Academy were not people he could offend? Take him away. Mao Qiu looked at Daoist Siyuan and said, back then, his parents placed him in your hands. You can't just watch as something happens to him. Daoist Siyuan's complexion was rather unsightly, but he said nothing. Standing up, he walked down the stairs. Mao Qiu once more turned to the Orthodox Academy and shook his head. After so many years, his temper hasn't changed in the slightest. It's no wonder he's always been inferior to Guanbai. Bi Tianxin left. The Orthodox Academy had obtained victory in this struggle. In the view of many people, this struggle was particularly childish and laughable, even more childish than the mischief of a child. However, in the view of those people who knew of Bi Tianxin's true identity, this seemingly childish and laughable struggle actually explained many things. The Orthodox Academy had once more proved to the capital that it had a powerful background and hidden strength, and its power had already been established. Yes, even if one put aside the White Emperor's city represented by Princess Luluo, one only had to talk about the Pope's attention and the relationship between Su Li and Chen Chongsheng. Other than a proper method, like the all-school martial exhibition, who would dare to break the rules and suppress the Orthodox Academy? Those foreign students from the various provinces and counties did not know of Bi Tianxin's background at the very beginning. But once they did, they couldn't help but admire Tang 36's unyielding stance and also gain a completely new understanding of the Orthodox Academy. As a result, the registration that had just paused for a few moments immediately became even more fervent. Some young students who had previously taken back their registration letters took advantage of the inattention to attempt to register again. However, they could not hide from Tang 36's eyes and were rudely driven away. Chen Chongsheng commented, "Too harsh." Tang 36 replied, "I've never been one to rub sand in my eyes. I can't even bear Bi Tianxin, so why should I bear these scoundrels?" Chen Chongsheng was truly very curious about this friend of his. He asked, "Have you always been this sort of person since you were small?" Tang 36 very matter-of-factly replied, "If I only had the 1 Tangs behind me and had to face off against 2 storms of the 8 directions, I would naturally have to think about it. I might have just endured it on the spot, but don't I have you right now?" Chen Chongsheng was rendered speechless by his matter-of-factness. After a long period of silence, he said, "I've said it before, cursing isn't good. You have to control yourself." Tang 36 arched his brows. "What's not good about it? It's very refreshing, okay?" Chen Chongsheng replied, "Anger harms the liver, and it's not good for the children to hear these curses. Many people have already complained." Chapter 479. The Orthodox Academy began to accept new students for a day, and in just one day, more than 600 people had signed up. The Orthodoxy cavalry patrolled the academy. The priests of the Li Palace maintained order. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education personally came up with the questions, and Priest Exian was in charge of the entire situation. Whether it was the registration or the examination on the second day, everything went smoothly. Other than the results of the examination, those who wanted to become a new student of the Orthodox Academy had to pass 2 more stages. The first was the identity examination, which was mainly handled by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. With Li Palace acting, it was very easy to investigate the backgrounds of those examinees. In the end, 6 people were disqualified. The second stage was the interview, which was personally handled by Chen Chongsheng and Tang 36. As for Xian Yuan Pe, he had absolutely no interest in this aspect. It could even be said that he was following by the side of that Clear Lake restaurant chef, unwilling to leave. Chen Chongsheng and Tang 36 standard was also very simple. They just needed to look at the candidate's speech and behavior. Of course, the most important thing was that the candidate must be pleasing to the eye. Looking at the disqualified candidates covering their faces and leaving, Chen Chongsheng thought about how he was also one of these candidates last year. He thought about how he applied to all the Ivies, but was tricked by the divine general of the East Mansion. He couldn't help but sigh at how quickly the situation changed. He actually went from a candidate to an examiner and felt a bit bad. There were 100 examinees who passed these 3 tests. These were the new students that the Tradition Academy accepted this year. What was somewhat unexpected was that the standard of these new students from Orthodox Academy was quite good. Although they came from relatively remote provinces, Jia had all successfully completed his purification, and 40 or so had already completed initial meditation. Chun Changsheng even found a few students with decent talent for cultivation, but what was most surprising was that out of the 100 new students, 20 or so had transferred from other academies. Since he was shocked, the other academies mentioned here were naturally not the normal academies of the capital, but the Heavenly Tao Academy, the Temple Seminary, and the other Ivy academies that were equally famous as the Orthodox Academy. Looking at the names on the list, Priest Xian was a little worried that something might go wrong and cause trouble. Most of these students have already succeeded in their initial meditation. They're not bad compared to the students from the provinces, but they're nothing in a place like Heavenly Academy. They're definitely not valued, so they want to transfer to us. Tang 36 said, since they weren't valued in the first place, their original schools shouldn't care too much. But even if it's eaten by others, it'll still taste good. Priest Xan swallowed the indecent word with some difficulty and said, and the situation has been rather tense recently. The so-called all-school martial exhibition is actually just the Tianhai clan using their power to suppress others. It doesn't have much to do with the academies themselves. Tang 36 said, in addition, Chun Changsheng is the future pope. The 6 Ivies are all under his control. What's so special about having a few students in advance? Hearing these words, and thinking of how Tang 36 had pointed at Tianxin and cursed the 2 storms of the 8 directions at the gate of the Orthodox Academy yesterday, Priest Xian knew that Tang 36 truly did not care. Shaking his head, he no longer brought it up. Of course, the recruitment of new students was not as simple as an examination. In the next few days, the Orthodox Academy became incomparably lively. The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education sent quite a few craftsmen to work, turning the formerly quiet campus into a bustling construction site. Fortunately, in the spring of last year, this place had already undergone a thorough renovation. The foundation had already been laid, so in a very short period of time, the entire project was smoothly completed. The Orthodox Academy had an enormous amount of unused space. There was no need to use it all. Only a small part of it was enough to accommodate these 100 new students. The small building that Chun Changsheng and the others were used to living in, as well as the forest and lake that held a special meaning to them, were separated by a newly constructed wall. They still maintained their relative independence, and presumably would not be too noisy in the future. The library was protected by an array, and those books were not easy to move, so they were left outside, open to all students. The garden that was separated from the wall, near the 100-her garden and the Imperial Palace, now had a new name, Bee Garden. When Priest Xian heard this name for the first time, he couldn't help but ask, did this name have anything to do with that dejected Tianxin that day? New bedding was delivered, new teaching materials for the orthodoxy were delivered, new uniforms were distributed to the hands of the new students, smoke rose from the kitchen of the cafeteria, and water sprayed into the sky from the fountain, bringing a great deal of coolness to the scorching summer night. Everything had been prepared. The new students nervously and excitedly waited for the day of classes. Tomorrow, the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education would send over the teachers they had chosen over the past few days. At the same time, they would also send over a large sum of money. At night, Chun Changsheng walked around the Orthodox Academy to see if there was anything out of place. Only then did he realize that the Orthodox Academy was actually so large. He had been here for an entire year, but he had actually only been in a tenth of the area. Looking at the brightly lit library, looking through the window at those students hungrily gazing at the books of the Orthodox Academy, he felt very good. His teacher was the previous principal of the Orthodox Academy, and he was the current principal of the Orthodox Academy. The Orthodox Academy had been abandoned under his teacher's hands, but now it seemed that it was about to be truly reborn under his hands. This sort of feeling was truly very good, even though even now, he still did not understand why Tang 36 had done such a thing. After returning to the small building and finishing treating Zhixio, He and Tang 36 checked the list of new students one last time. To their surprise, they discovered a very familiar name and couldn't help but be shocked. Has he been here? Chen Changsheng pointed at the name and asked Tang 36. I also haven't seen him. I heard that he's still in the Mausoleum of Books. He had a junior brother from the Li Palace Academy come and sign up for him. Tang 36 asked, if you think it's against the rules, I'll have someone bring a message and tell him not to come. Chen Changsheng replied, it's fine if it's another transfer student, but if he really comes, the Li Palace Academy will definitely not agree. Tang 36 said, it's not like we're crying and begging him to come. So why do you care so much? Chen Changsheng thought that this was true, so he changed the subject and asked, what about Bi Tianxin's side? They were both keenly aware that Bi Tianxin had suffered such a great humiliation that day. He was assuredly holding back his anger and would seek revenge in battle. Tang 36 pointed at the pile of challenge letters on the bookshelf and said, right now, there are already 134 matches waiting for us. When there are so many lice, what itch is there to be afraid of? Where did the Tianhai clan get so many experts? Chen Changsheng was somewhat confused. He thought to himself, with so many cultivators obeying the orders of the Tianhai clan, wouldn't that be enough to destroy a country? If it was one of those small countries in the northwest, the Tianhai clan could exterminate them with a wave of their hand. But if placed in the context of the entire continent, it's actually not too exaggerated. The Mount Li Sword sect would definitely be able to send so many people. Tang 36 said, and it should be about time now. Presumably, after dealing with this batch, they'll stop for a while. Chen Changxing asked, can we deal with them? Of course not. Not to mention the fact that there are experts like Bi Tianxin among them. Tang 36 said, or else why would we need to recruit so many new students? Chen Changsheng thought it over, then said, it's best if we don't fight. I'm worried that there will be injuries. Tang 36 said, without experiencing battle, how can they quickly grow? Their foundations have always been poor, so it's only natural that they work even harder. In addition, this matter mainly depends on you. After saying this, the two of them took down the pile of challenge letters from the bookshelf and began to arrange them on the floor. Chen Changsheng earnestly began to calculate, while Tang 36 used a pen to record on the side. They first picked out all the lower-level ethereal opening students, and then Chen Changsheng chose the corresponding students to fight. As for how to choose and why to choose, Tang 36 also did not understand. Just as he had said, this matter depended on Chen Changsheng, because only he knew the intellectual sword. What Chen Changsheng was currently doing was turning the 100-some matches of the all-school martial exhibition into one battle. His sword was all the new students of the Orthodox Academy. How those new students would fight would depend on his sword style. Seeing Chen Changsheng wholeheartedly calculating, Tang 36 suddenly felt somewhat sorrowful, saying, your fate is truly good. This was not the first time that someone had said that Chen Changsheng's fate was good, and it was also not the first time that Tang 36 had said that his fate was good. Chen Changsheng knew that Tang 36 was sorrowful about his fate. To be able to discover the sword pool in the Garden of Zhou, to be able to fight with those demon experts, to be able to meet Su Li, to bring them south, and thus learn those 3 swords. Shaking his head, he suddenly thought of something. Raising his head to Tang 36, he asked, do you want to learn? This was naturally referring to those 3 swords. In any case, when Su Li had taught him those 3 swords on the road, he had not said that he could not teach them to others. He even thought about whether or not he could arrange for those 3 swords to be a compulsory course in the Orthodox Academy. As for whether or not Su Li would be angry if he knew, that was a matter for the future. Tang 36 did not reveal an expression of pleasant surprise, nor did he show any gratitude. He looked at Chen Changsheng like he was looking at an idiot. Chen Changsheng asked somewhat uneasily, what's wrong? Did I say something wrong? Tang 36 sighed, then said, if I weren't familiar with you, I would definitely think that you were intentionally humiliating me. Chen Changsheng felt very wronged, thinking, how did my good intentions turn into humiliation? I can't learn those 3 swords. Tang 36 looked at him and seriously said, so in the future, please don't bring up this matter to humiliate my intelligence, understand? Qin Changxing opened his eyes wide and asked, "Why can't you learn it?" Tang 36 angrily said, "I just can't stand to see that innocent face of yours. Why can't you learn it? You ask me, and who do I ask? You think that if you can learn it, everyone in the world can learn it? Then why has Su Li only taught the three of you in his entire life? Besides you and Qiu Shanjun, there's also his own daughter. Why doesn't he go teach the disciples and grand disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect?" At this moment, Zhixiu suddenly opened his eyes on the bed. For some reason, Tang 36 was in an extremely bad mood. He looked at him and yelled, "You know you're awake just by hearing her name? You're not playing dead anymore? Pervert." Zhixiu thought about it, then said, "Wait until I'm healed, then I'll come beat you up." Tang 36 was not afraid of him. He sneered, "Then if you have the ability, then hurry up and get better. Don't talk so much useless stuff. I'm going to talk to Qin Changsheng, so you could go sleep." Zhixiu was rather straightforward. He could pick up and let go. Seeing that they weren't talking about Qi Jian, he really did close his eyes and continue to rest. There's still one more chapter in the evening. There's a draft. It's just that heroic. Chapter 480. Qin Changsheng understood a little, but he said somewhat uncertainly, "The third sword truly is rather difficult." According to what Su Li said, he himself had not learned it, but the first two swords, he wanted to say that he didn't find it difficult when he was learning, but looking at Tang 36's face, he swallowed the second half of his words with difficulty. Tang 36 sneered. The second sword was clearly created by Su Li to deal with the problem of your meridians. So how can we learn it? As for the first sword, the calculation ability required is too strong. Do you think anyone can do it? Qin Changsheng thought to himself that Lady Chu Jian's calculation ability was much stronger than his. Tang 36 looked at him and asked seriously, "Qin Changsheng, do you really not know that you are a genius?" Qin Changsheng thought about it. His memory was not bad. As for his ability to calculate, it had probably been greatly strengthened when he was viewing the monoliths in the mausoleum of books. As for being a genius, he shook his head. Tang 36 said, "When I first met you in the Heavenly Academy, what did I say?" Qin Changsheng said, "You said I'm a genius." Tang 36 patted him on the shoulder and said, "Believe me, I have never misjudged a person." Qin Changsheng thought about it and didn't know how to respond. Tang 36 said, "Right, you have to teach me the true sword of the orthodoxy and the toppling mountain staff." Qin Changsheng didn't understand and asked, "You're not even willing to take a look at the fundamental method of Lishan sword arts. Why do you want to learn this?" "I'm a student of the Tradition Academy, so of course I have to learn the sword arts of the Tradition Academy. What's the point of learning the Li Mountain sword arts?" Tang 36 looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. He had long forgotten that he had just praised him as a genius. "Besides, since I'm going to be the supervisor, I'll be a laughing stock if I don't know these two sword techniques." The true sword of the orthodoxy was a foundational sword technique that every expert of the Orthodox Academy had to grasp. Its power was not weak, but there were not many sword techniques. As for the toppling mountain staff, it was actually not a sword technique, but a staff technique used by the teachers in charge of maintaining discipline in the Orthodox Academy to punish disobedient students. Yes, Qin Changsheng would be the principal of the new Tradition Academy, and Tang 36 will be the first superintendent of the new Tradition Academy. The logistics manager of the new Orthodox Academy was Xianyuan Pe. Zhixiu was still recovering from his injuries, but his duties had already been arranged ahead of time. In the future, he would be responsible for teaching the students of the Orthodox Academy how to fight and how to survive in the snowy plains of the land of demons. Of course, the Orthodox Academy still had a very noble position left for Luoluo, the lifelong honorary vice principal. And the new academy rules clearly stated that in the future, the Orthodox Academy would no longer have the position of vice principal. One day in the middle of summer, there was a sea of people outside Hunter Blossom Street, and inside Hunter Blossom Street, colorful flags fluttered. After 20 years, the Orthodox Academy had finally reopened. To many of the elders of the Orthodoxy, this was a grand occasion. Who knew how many old priests of the Lee Palace had their lapels wet with tears? For the Bureau of Traditional Education, this was the greatest legacy left by the late Lord Bishop. It was also their greatest wish. All the clergymen and staff were happy, but they also felt a little sad. To the imperial clan, after many years of silence, this was finally their voice to the continent. Although Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 definitely did not think this way, this did not affect Prince Chen Lu, who came to attend the ceremony, completely forgetting that so many eyes were watching him and that the Divine Empress might soon learn of the danger. His hand stroked the green tree, filled with emotion. To the 100 new students of the Orthodox Academy, this was a brand new beginning in their lives and also their greatest opportunity. To the Tianhai clan and the new faction of the Orthodoxy, this was a rather dangerous signal. But to MOU, this was a joke. It's fine if you're the principal. In any case, it's His Holiness the Pope's sacred words that decide everything. It's fine if you're Princess Luoluo. In any case, it's just an empty title. But Tang Tang, that guy who can't even control himself, is actually the Academy's supervisor? Don't you think that the most likely possibility is that he'll get the students drunk and then skip class every day? That Black Bear as the logistics manager? Aren't you worried that the chef of Clear Lake Restaurant, for the sake of money, will make a large pot of food that will be eaten by him alone? MOU looked at Chen Changsheng and laughed like a flower. The funniest thing is Zheshio, teaching the students how to survive. When the time comes, he'll bury the students in a pile of snow. If they come out before 7 days, they'll fail. Hey, I say, just how many coffins did you prepare? This was Chen Changsheng's room in the small building. He sat across from her, looking rather tired, mainly because too many things had happened today. Of course, it also had something to do with her laughing to her heart's content. MOU had naturally come to the Orthodox Academy today to watch the excitement, and at the same time to watch the joke. She had not formally appeared, only waiting for everything to conclude before quietly appearing in his room. But for some reason, she had clearly put on meticulous makeup before coming. She seemed even more exquisite and beautiful than usual, even a little radiant and moving. From the principal to the academy supervisor, there's actually not a single person in charge of the Orthodox Academy that's over 20. Are you all playing house? MOU laughed even more happily, the golden flower stuck in her black hair, trembling even more fiercely. Isn't this because you all forced me? Chen Changsheng did not want to hear her continue jeering. So he changed the subject and asked, "Why are you dressed so formally today? Something happened in the court?" MOU was a little startled. She thought to herself that she usually dressed like this. How was it strange? Suddenly, she remembered that other than the first time they met in the Night Palace, most of the time she met Chen Changsheng was at night, and it was usually when she wanted to come over and sleep on his bed, or she had already fallen asleep on his bed. At that time, she obviously did not put on any makeup or clothes. She would come over after washing up. With no makeup on, it must be very different from now. Thinking about these things, she felt a little embarrassed. When she remembered that last time Chen Changsheng told her to wash up before getting on his bed, she couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. She glared at him and flew out of the window with the wind, disappearing into the forest just like that. Chen Changsheng thought confusedly. Tang 36 was right. Women were indeed the most difficult people to understand in the world. He clearly didn't say anything, so why was she suddenly unhappy? He did not lie to MOU. The main reason why the Tradition Academy decided to recruit new students was because the Tianhai family and the new faction of the Tradition were giving too much pressure. There were too many people who wanted to challenge the Tradition Academy. But that day at the gate of the Tradition Academy, Bi Tianxin's words accusing them of having evil intentions and Tang 36's subsequent promise had already spread far and wide. Therefore, many people, including the 100 new students, wanted to know what the Tradition Academy would do next. On the morning of the second day, the matches that had stopped for several days began again. The citizens of the capital who had rested for several days spread the news. They brought the old and the young back to the Tradition Academy. The gate of the Tradition Academy once again became very lively. Last night, Chen Changsheng had already drafted the list of matches and had given pointers to the new students. He had used up too much mental energy, so he did not enter the field and instead rested in the academy. Tang 36 brought 30 new students and stood in front of the gate of the Tradition Academy. Not to mention anything else, just by looking at the uniform of the new students, one would feel that they were very energetic and full of vigor. At this moment, the first person to challenge the Tradition Academy had already walked onto the field. He clasped his hands and said, "Please enlighten me." This person came from Li Palace College and had already reached the lower stage of ethereal opening. He really wanted to know who the Tradition Academy would send to fight against him. Of course, he knew that he was no match for Chen Changsheng and the others. But looking at the current situation, it was obvious that the Tradition Academy would send new students to fight. But among the new students standing behind Tang 36, no one had reached ethereal opening. Why would they come out to fight? Tang 36 didn't care about what this person and the people outside were thinking. He looked at the list in his hand and said, "Chun Fu Gui, step out." As soon as he finished speaking, a new student squeezed out from behind his classmates. This new student was not old, but his body was extremely sturdy and strong. He looked like a smaller version of Xian Yuan Pa. Tang 36 didn't waste any time. He pointed at the challenger from Li Palace College and said to him, "Can you beat him?" The new student named Chun Fugui heavily patted his chest and said, "You have to fight to know. You have guts." Tang 36 seemed to be praising him, but his face did not show any excitement. He said cleanly, "Then go fight." "Okay." The new student named Chun Fugui roared and jumped down from the stone stairs. Like a tiger coming out of the mountains, he leaped towards the challenger from Li Palace College. The challenger was shocked by the momentum. He thought to himself, "Is this a hidden elite of the Tradition Academy?" He thought to himself. Looking at the new student's momentum, he suddenly thought of Princess Luo Luo from the Tradition Academy and the White Emperor's most terrifying technique. His spirit couldn't help but become a little messed up. He felt that this was very similar to the martial arts of the legends and subconsciously felt a little timid. Before a battle, the most important thing was to stay calm. At this moment, his spirit was slightly messed up and his breathing was also messed up. His movements inevitably slowed down. The new student's fist, which was as big as a bowl, was already in front of him. He was worried that there was some powerful technique hidden behind this fist, so he didn't dare to take it head-on. He quickly retreated. But because he retreated in a hurry, he couldn't completely escape the range of the new student's fist. The side of his face was hit by the fist, and it felt a little hot. This hot pain made him completely awake. He was shocked to find that although the new student's fist technique seemed to be violent, it clearly only had the form and not the intent. Moreover, the true essence in the two bowl-sized fists was pitifully weak. This was just a normal student who had just entered the first meditation realm. Yet he acted as if he was facing a great enemy and almost lost. The challenger from Li Palace College was enraged. He was angry at his own stupidity and his opponent's weak momentum. With a loud roar, he slashed his sword forward. "Stop!" At this moment, a voice rang out. It was very calm, but very powerful, as if something very important, or at least something many times more important than this battle, had happened. The sword of the challenger from Li Palace College stopped in midair and looked towards the source of the voice. Chapter 481. Tang 36 walked down from the stone steps and stood next to the freshman named Chun Fugui. He looked at him and nodded. "Your performance was not bad. In the future, you will learn this running tiger in the dark forest." Hearing this, Chun Fugui was slightly startled before he reacted. His face was filled with ecstasy as he said in a trembling voice, "Thank you, Superintendent." "Thank you, Superintendent." Tang 36 turned around to look at the dozens of new students and said, "Do you see? This is what I said last night. In a battle between two armies, the most important thing is momentum. Whether you are a match for the enemy or not, you have to fight to know. Moreover, before you make a move, you absolutely cannot think that you are inferior to the other party. As the saying goes, it is better to be beaten to death than to be scared to death. There is also the saying, if you can't beat someone to death, you have to scare them to death. The new students of the Orthodox Academy responded in unison, their voices extremely orderly. They looked at Chen Fugue with eyes filled with envy and yearning. The challenger from the Lee Palace College was completely baffled by this scene. Finally, he could not help but ask, "What's going on? Don't you want to fight anymore?" Tang 36 asked Chen Fugue, "Can you beat him?" He had asked this question before the battle began. At that time, Chen Fugue said that how would he know if he could win if he had not fought before? Now that he had fought, he honestly admitted, "I can't beat him. Don't be discouraged. You've only been in the initial reflection realm for less than 2 months, so of course you're no match for someone in the ethereal opening realm. It's not like you're a peerless genius like me or the principal." Tang 36 reached out his hand and patted his thick shoulder. He comforted him. "You should summarize today's battle tonight and prepare for your future studies." The spectators thought to themselves that the battle had just begun and nothing had been done. What was there to conclude? The challenger from the Lee Palace Academy looked at Chen Fugue, who was walking back up the stone steps, and was also somewhat at a loss. He looked at Tang 36 and asked, "And then?" The battle had just begun, and he hadn't even had time to draw his sword before he was called to stop. Then, shouldn't they continue fighting? Tang 36 looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot and said, "If I can't win, of course I admit defeat." The challenger from the Lee Palace College was truly dumbfounded. After staring blankly for a long time, he came to his senses and asked in disbelief, "It can't be? That's it? What else? You still want to stay for dinner?" Our Orthodox Academy's cafeteria even invited a chef from Clear Lake Restaurant. Normal people can forget about freeloading. With these words, Tang 36 walked towards the gate of the Tradition Academy to prepare for the second match. The challenger from Lee Palace College was enraged. His aura abruptly rose, and the sword in his hand began to emit a chill. Tang 36 stopped and turned around to look at him. He said expressionlessly, "Try taking another step forward." Tang 36 stopped and turned. 6636 to him. 2 Tang Palace. 1622 and 1012. Only now did the crowd of spectators understand what the Orthodox Academy was preparing to do. With a boom, they began to clamor, but in the next moment, they were suppressed back by the killing intent that enveloped the entire field. The Tradition Academy is going to act shamelessly, Chen the 36 said. Tian Academy, the Academy. 30 Fugue. One another. At. Someone. A someone. Came. A 6. A 36 came. Another Chun. A 6 came. It was that young student who had been so confident on the day of the Orthodox Academy's recruitment. Tang 36 looked at him and said, "Amongst your classmates, your cultivation is the strongest. Perform well, and let those outsiders see the true strength of our Orthodox Academy." Fu Xinji clasped his hands in greeting. He slowly unsheathed his long sword and walked onto the field, his bearing very steady. The challenger from the Lee Palace Fugue was still standing on the field. From beginning to end, no one paid any attention to him. Alone, he seemed rather pitiful, rather laughable. He was clearly the victor of this battle, but where did he feel any sense of victory? He shot a hateful glare at Tang 36, then brushed his sleeve and left. Following him was another swordsman at the middle level of ethereal opening. Tang 36 could no longer remember which school he was representing. He only knew that Chen Changsheng had clearly explained to him last night that Fu Xinji's opponent could only be this swordsman. Moreover, Chen Changsheng had left a very detailed note on the roster, explaining how Fu Xinji should use his sword and how many swords he could use at most. Time passed rather slowly, or perhaps it was better to say that the first match had ended too quickly. It was still early in the morning. Although it was the height of summer, it was not very hot. Fu Xinji gripped his sword and stood on the flat ground in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate, allowing the cool breeze to curl around him and lift up his sleeves. He seemed rather otherworldly. His opponent was also a swordsman. His blue robe reflected the morning light, the edge of his sword slightly cold. He also seemed to have an excellent demeanor. Seeing this scene, the crowd that had still been somewhat depressed by the absurd conclusion of the last match instantly raised their spirits. The swordsman expressionlessly said, "Please." Fu Xinji gazed at his opponent's face in the morning light. He seemed calm, but in reality, only he knew how nervous he was. He was a student from Suiyang County. He was not like the students of the capital who could receive knowledge of cultivation from a young age. Although his talent was not bad, his strength had never been too high. As for fighting ability, in Suiyang County, he had never truly fought with anyone. Today was the first true battle of his life, and his opponent was a middle-level ethereal opening expert that he could not even imagine in Suiyang County, someone that he could only regard as a senior and expert. How could he not be nervous? He could not be nervous. This was what Principal Chun had repeated the most last night. The most important thing was momentum. Momentum was not only in ferocity, but also in calmness. The academy supervisor had been repeating this principle from morning class until now. In his mind, he once again memorized the positions, speeds, and methods to circulate true essence that Principal Chun had told him last night. Then he took a deep breath. He calmed down, and then he struck. With a whoosh, a storm seemed to suddenly rise in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate. The first move of the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong, rising pale yellow. His sword passed through the storm with incredible speed and arrived in front of the swordsman. The swordsman was still expressionless. His sword left the sheath, and his true essence surged forth, shaking Fu Xinji's sword off its original trajectory. Fu Xinji did not panic. For some reason, it was just like what Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 had said to all the new students last night. When he struck out with his first strike, the reverence he usually had for ethereal opening cultivators in Suiyang County disappeared without a trace. Moreover, he had practiced the current situation several times last night. His sword just happened to be in that position, the position that Principal Chun had calculated. That position was very good for the fifth move of the wind and rain sword of the Zhong family. He focused his mind and calmed his qi. The momentum of his sword suddenly increased, and the storm gradually grew stronger. From his side, he once again stabbed towards his opponent. At the same time, he counted in his mind, this is the second strike. Last night, Principal Chun said that if he could use 4 sword moves in front of this powerful opponent today, then it would be considered a success. Crack, 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 crack. The sword light flashed incessantly, and then disappeared without a trace. The storm in front of the Orthodox Academy also disappeared without a trace. What remained was a clear sky and the approaching summer heat. The swordsman still stood expressionlessly in his original position, not moving at all. There was no wound on his body, only an extremely small tear in the front of his blue robe. Fu Xinji gripped his sword, his chest slightly rising and falling. An extremely deep sword wound had appeared on his left shoulder, and blood was constantly flowing out. But it was as if he could not feel the pain. His eyes were very bright, and he seemed especially excited and excited. Of course, he could not win. Although he was the strongest person in this batch of new students, the gap between him and ethereal opening cultivators was still insurmountable. But he struck out 4 times. This was the most important matter, and it was also the matter that Chun Changsheng hoped he could accomplish. So not only did he not feel any sense of defeat, he even felt a sense of heroism. He hadn't even been in the Orthodox Academy for 5 days, but he could actually strike out 4 times in front of an ethereal opening expert. Then if he studied a little longer in the Orthodox Academy, just how far would he be able to go? He looked into the swordsman's eyes and thought to himself, next year, as long as next year, I will definitely be able to truly defeat you. What are you still standing there for? Tang 36's voice rang out in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate. Fu Xinji came to his senses and sheathed his sword. He bowed to the swordsman and then walked back. The swordsman was not as angry as the challenger from the Li Palace Academy, nor did he attempt to stop him. And it was very obvious that this had nothing to do with the Orthodoxy cavalry or the crossbow bolts on the wall. Tang 36 looked at the returning Fu Xinji and said, according to last night's calculations, if you wanted to use all 4 of these sword moves, you truly would have been injured, but it wouldn't have been so severe. Fu Xinji walked back. Only then did his schoolmates clearly see how deep the wound was, so deep that one could even faintly see the bone. I used a little deeper in that last strike, he nervously said, because I really wanted to try and see if I could stab my opponent. His last strike had not been able to stab into his opponent's body, only leaving an extremely small hole in his opponent's clothes. If one did not look carefully, they would not even be able to see it. Tang 36 looked at him and asked, "Do you think it was worth it? To use a sword wound so deep that bone could be seen to trade for a small hole in his opponent's clothes? Anyone would think that this was not worth it." But Fu Xinji seriously thought it over, then said, "I think it was worth it. If you think it was worth it, then it was worth it." Tang 36 smiled and said with satisfaction, "For example, if I think you're pretty good, then you're really not bad." At this moment, the swordsman's voice suddenly came from the field. For some reason, the swordsman's voice was trembling, perhaps out of fear or excitement. "Excellent sword style." As he said this, he was not looking at Fu Xinji, but at Tang 36. It was not fear, but excitement, even the shock of seeing the beautiful scenery of a famed mountain and sea of clouds. With Fu Xinji's cultivation, the fact that he could learn the wind and rain sword of Mount Zhong, even if it was only 2 moves, was already shocking enough. But this swordsman's shock and praise did not come from this. What truly shocked him was the person who had taught Fu Xinji this sword style. Chapter 482. This swordsman was at the middle level of ethereal opening. Logically speaking, a casual strike from Meditation Realm Youth should have been enough to defeat him. But Fu Xinji's first strike had come too quickly, forcing him to first adopt a defensive stance. And just when he was prepared to switch from defense to offense, Fu Xinji's second strike arrived, still very fast. For it to be so fast meant that there was no pause between Fu Xinji's 2 strikes. And logically speaking, it was very difficult to link the first and fifth moves of the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong together, much less so smoothly. The problem was that his sword had jolted Fu Xinji's sword upwards. It was precisely this position, precisely this angle, that allowed Fu Xinji's 2 strikes to be as fast as lightning. He had seen the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong, but he had never imagined that it could be used in this manner. What shocked him even more were Fu Xinji's 3rd and 4th strikes. Those 2 sword techniques were the true swords of the orthodoxy. How could the wind and rain sword of Mountain Zhong be transformed into the true swords of the orthodoxy so smoothly? And it even gave off a feeling of wondrous perfection. It was clearly not a sword style. So why did it seem like a chain of swords created by those great sects of the sword over 1,000 years? To this swordsman, these 4 strikes were truly too wondrous, too frightening. He was keenly aware that if Fu Xinji's cultivation was not far below his, he truly would have no idea how to deal with these 4 strikes. To put it another way, if Fu Xinji could break into ethereal opening, even if he was an entire level lower than him, he could still use these 4 strikes to threaten him. These 4 strikes were naturally not something that a new student from a province who had just entered the orthodoxy could think of. And when Fu Xinji changed his sword techniques just now, it seemed like he had accurately predicted the situation, but it was even more obvious that someone had already planned it out for him. Who could have predicted all the details of today's clash of swords and come up with such a perfect solution? When the swordsman thought that there was such a person in the world, he felt his entire body go cold and hot. When he thought that someone had actually reached this step on the path of the sword, he became extremely excited. He wanted nothing more than to drink to his heart's content. "This is Principal Chen's sword style?" he asked Tang 36 in a trembling voice. Tang 36 said yes. The swordsman was silent for a long time before he calmed down from the shock. He sighed and said, "I've heard the story of him and Go Han Shi discussing swords at last year's Ivy League gathering. Every time I heard the details, I always felt that the narrator was exaggerating and exaggerating. After all, he was only in the meditation state at that time. Only now do I know that there are people who are born with knowledge of the way of the sword." Hearing these words, Tang 36 naturally remembered the scene from last year's Ivy Festival. He was also very emotional and said, "Don't tell me you don't believe me." At that time, he said that I would be responsible for drawing the sword, but before I drew the sword, I didn't believe that he could help me defeat Qi Jian, but that guy did it. The swordsman sighed with emotion again. Such talent in sword arts is really amazing. I'll pass on your compliments to him, but he definitely won't admit that he's a genius in the sword Dao, Tang 36 said. He will only say that he is more diligent and has a better memory. The swordsman froze at these words, thinking, even a blind person can see this kind of talent in the sword Dao. So how could he deny it? He didn't know what to say. I also think that his appearance when he said those words was very infuriating. Yes, sometimes even more infuriating than me. Tang 36 clasped his hands to the swordsman. The swordsman nodded and returned to the back of the crowd, but he did not stand with the Tianhai clan experts. Instead, he continued to walk even further into the distance. He believed that he would walk very far, until he crossed the bridge of helplessness, walked out of the city gate, and then went to an even vaster world. Today, he finally saw that the path of the sword was as vast as the sea. How could he stay in a small city like the capital? Soon, the third match began. The expert challenging the Orthodox Academy had a gloomy expression. He was clearly not a kind person, and he did not conceal the killing intent in his eyes. The one representing the Orthodox Academy was a student from the Heavenly Tao Academy called Chu Wenbin. Senior, the situation doesn't seem right. Chu Wenbin looked at the expert and whispered uneasily. He used to be a student of the Heavenly Tao Academy, and Tang 36 also used to be a student of the Heavenly Tao Academy. They had always known each other, and now that they had both become students of the Orthodox Academy, although they couldn't be said to be fellow sufferers sympathizing with each other, they at least had a different kind of relationship. In his nervousness, he habitually called Tang 36 Senior, even forgetting to call him Academy Superintendent. Tang 36, who cared deeply about this matter, was not very angry. What's wrong? Tang 36 leaned to the side and asked. Chu Wenbin timidly glanced at the field and said, "That person seems rather fierce." Tang 36 said, "Last night, Chen Changshan taught you a move specifically to deal with this person. If your luck is good, you might be able to take advantage of him. Even if you're afraid, you can't switch out at the last moment." Feeling helpless, Chu Wenbin raised his sword and walked down the stone steps. The gloomy expert looked at Chu Wenbin, whose skin was as white as a woman's, and revealed a sinister and indescribable smile. It turns out there really are people who aren't afraid of death. Chu Wenbin was badly frightened by this smile. He turned to Tang 36 and said, "Senior, he's trying to scare me." Tang 36 arched his brows and said to the expert, "I say, if you want to fight, then fight. What nonsense are you spouting?" The expert's smile vanished, and he said with a threatening chill, "Does the Orthodox Academy now not even dare to listen to a word of truth?" Tang 36 said, "If you have the ability, then beat him to death for me to see." Chu Wenbin was shocked by these words, thinking, "Senior, these words of yours are very handsome and full of vigor, but my life is my own." The expert sneered, "So what if I beat him to death?" Tang 36 slightly pursed his lips. Just like Chun Changsheng in Clear Lake Restaurant, he could also clearly sense this person's killing intent. The rules of the all-school martial exhibition do not say that you can beat someone to death. He expressionlessly said to the expert, "If you want to break the rules, I naturally have a way of playing that doesn't follow the rules." The expert began to laugh. Paired with his pale complexion and gloomy eyes, his smile seemed particularly frightening. "A few days ago, my young master said that swords and sabers have no eyes." Upon hearing these words, the crowd realized that this person was actually Bi Tianxin's subordinate, or perhaps his servant. Although he was just a subordinate, or even a servant, to be able to walk the world with Bi Tianxin and make those two storms of the 8 directions feel at ease, this person was assuredly extremely powerful and terrifying. "Swords and sabers have no eyes, and you're not blind." Tang 36 looked at him and said, "If it's inappropriate, I will naturally shout for you to stop." The servant from the Bi clan smirked. "Why should I stop just because young Master Tang says so? Besides, these students of your Orthodox Academy are too weak. If I were to fight normally, it would be normal for me to slip up and kill him." "Slip up?" Tang 36's brows rose up like a sword about to be unsheathed. The servant from the Bee clan seemed to be very kind as he explained. Slip up means that you can't stop. You're right. The new students of our Orthodox Academy are naturally still relatively weak, but to them, you're unquestionably experts. When the strong bully the weak, people still can't stop. Tang 36 looked at him and very calmly said, then I might as well ask your entire family to stop. The expression of the servant from the Bee clan shivered. Sir should be well aware that I am a person of the Bee clan. Of course I know that you are a servant of the Bee clan, Yi Xingqing. Tang 36 looked at him and said, but your own family is in Shannon County. Relying on the power of the Bee clan, you bully men and take women, committing all sorts of crimes, occupying tens of thousands of mu of good farmland. I hear that your son is even a county official. Upon hearing these words, the expression of the servant from the Bee clan, called Yi Xingqing, suddenly changed. He harshly rebuked. What do you mean by that? What I mean is that I know who you are. Tang 36 no longer looked at him. Turning to those experts behind the crowd that had come to challenge the Orthodox Academy on the orders of the Tianhai clan, he said, all of you, I know who you are, so if you want to fight, then fight. But if someone really wants to make this matter bigger and say some nonsense like you can't stop, then I can only ask your entire family to stop. Then he turned back to Yi Xingqing and asked, now, do you understand? There are many things in this world that could be stopped, such as the sword, or words, or one's future, or even one's fate. When he said these words, he was very calm, completely devoid of his usual arrogant and pompous air. Only in this way could everyone present know that he was speaking the truth, not just some harsh words. Yes, not even the Orthodox Academy could do anything to the Bee clan. After all, it represented 2 storms of the 8 directions. But Yi Xingqing was still just a servant of the Bee clan. He had his own home, his own family, so when he threatened the Orthodox Academy, he should have clearly thought it through. The Orthodox Academy could very easily threaten him. After Tang 36 clearly said these words, Yi Xingqing finally understood, causing his complexion to become abnormally unsightly. Senior, you're truly extraordinary. Chu Wenbin's timidity gradually receded, and he happily said to Tang 36. At any other time, Tang 36 would assuredly be very happy to be praised in such a manner, but he did not right now, because he knew that this matter would not end here. Most importantly, back at the gate of the Orthodox Academy, he had said to the entire capital that he would absolutely not let this match affect these new students, so he did not want to take any risks. The arrangements he and Chan Changsheng had made last night had come to a temporary end. Although it was somewhat different from the original plan, he still decided to personally take action. Just then, a person walked out of the crowd. This person walked to the gate of the Orthodox Academy and said, let me fight this match. This was a quiet and noble young student, but he also gave off an upright and solemn aura. Tang 36 looked at him and asked, how come you've gotten so much darker? The young student glanced at him and slowly replied, you know, the pavilions behind those monoliths are a little small and can't block out the sun. The sword comes out of the mouth. This refers to Chun Changsheng and also to Tang 36. In addition, I would like to report something to everyone. In the past half a year, I haven't controlled my diet, and I've been drinking too much. As a result, my gout relapsed. It's not serious, but it hurts. From now on, I've become a vegetarian. Of course, there's medicine, so don't worry. I still have chapters, so there's no reason for me to stop updating. Please be at ease. Everyone must take care of their bodies. When it comes to exercising more, it's never too much. You must do it, but don't feel too pressured. We must have revolutionary optimism. Although my gout hurts, I can lose weight while I'm at it. I suddenly remembered that I have to seriously thank Taoist Kung. He's the author of Seiya's manga. When I was in a bad mood because of my illness, I saw Seiya's manga posted on Yaoqi. As a result, I read it from beginning to end. It's really good. Then I still felt that I wasn't satisfied, so I began to reread Seiya's novel. I discovered that it's really good. I recommend everyone to read Seiya's manga and then reread the novel. Just search for Seiya on Yaoqi and you'll find it. Or everyone can search on my Weibo. Manga is really fun, This is definitely not an advertisement. Chapter 483. Tang 36 looked down and couldn't help but laugh. He asked, "Then why are your hands still so white?" The young student replied, "Later, I figured it out. I hid my hands in my sleeves, so they couldn't be exposed to the sun, so they naturally turned back to their original color." Tang 36 examined him and felt the faint aura emanating from his body. He said with slight surprise, "Not bad. You've actually reached the middle level of ethereal opening." The young student said politely, "Thank you for your compliment, but it's just so." Tang 36 said, "Don't worry. Although you're still a little bit weaker than me, it's still not bad." The young student was slightly startled. Although he and Tang 36 had interacted a lot in the grand examination and the mausoleum of books, he was still not used to it. He thought about it and said, "You were lucky." Tang 36 sneered. "When I left the mausoleum of books, I was truly at the upper level of ethereal opening. You were a month behind me when you were only at the middle level of ethereal opening. What does this have to do with luck?" The young student thought about it again and said, "What you said makes sense. I am indeed inferior to you." This austere student with a refined and noble air was the most promising student of Li Palace Academy in the past few years, Su Mou. Back then, Su Mou had once doubted Chen Changsheng on the divine avenue of Li Palace, but when he discovered that his doubts were unfounded, he quickly realized his mistake and solemnly apologized. In the grand examination, he had also traveled with the people of Orthodox Academy for a long period of time. His talent was indeed outstanding, but due to his luck with the lots, he wasn't able to progress very far. Afterwards, when everyone entered the mausoleum of books to view the monoliths and comprehend the Tao, Chen Changsheng and the others left one after another. A month ago, even Tang 36, Go Hanshi, and the other disciples of Mount Li had left. Only Su Mou, for some unknown reason, continued to stay in the mausoleum of books to view the monoliths. After Chen Changsheng and the others found out about this, they were even somewhat worried that this somewhat inflexible and wooden fellow would really be attracted by the heavenly tome monoliths and would no longer be willing to leave the mausoleum of books and become a monolith guardian. Tang 36 looked at Su Mou and asked, "Are you sure you want to fight this match?" Su Mou looked at Yi Xingqing and said, "I should be the one to fight this match." Tang 36 did not understand the hidden meaning in these words. Su Mou and the already suicidal Zhuang Huan were the same. They were both the most outstanding students of the Six Ivies and were also famous in the capital. It was only during this year that Chen Changsheng and Orthodox Academy had stolen much of his limelight, but there were still many people in the capital who recognized him. As the news spread, the crowd discussed amongst themselves. Not only were they not shocked, but they were also confused, wondering when did he become a student of Orthodox Academy. As Yi Xingqing heard these discussions, for some reason, his complexion became somewhat unsightly. He looked at Su Mou and asked with some hesitation, "Aren't you a student of the Li Palace Academy?" Tang 36 didn't notice that he used a respectful title for Su Mou and said, "Oh, he already signed up for the Orthodox Academy." Then, he turned to Su Mou and asked, "Are you confident?" This question was not superfluous. After all, Yi Xingqing was not an ordinary servant. He was a servant trained by the two storms of the eight directions. Su Mou had chosen to leave the mausoleum of books because, compared to before, both his cultivation and strength had definitely risen, but he was still not a match for this person. Tang 36 had previously prepared to act himself, not only because he thought that only the Wunshui Tangs could resist the other families, but also because he had considered this. Su Mou seemed to have thought of something and did not respond. Tang 36 thought it over, then said, "Although he is a servant of the other families, his technique does not follow the path of those two powerful figures, but rather the path of the Puqian Star River." Su Mou was somewhat shocked. It seemed that this was his first time hearing of this matter. Yi Xingqing did not care that the details of his technique had been exposed. He only looked at Su Mou with unease. The Puqian Star River walks a strange and sinister path. 2 days ago, when the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education brought the information over, Chun Chongsheng studied it and drew up a few plans. Tang 36 pointed at Chu Wenbin, who had already retreated to the stone steps, and said, "If he were to use this plan, he would only be able to hold out for a while, but since you're the one acting, you should be able to defeat him." After saying this, he did not wait for Su Mou to say anything and directly explained all of Chun Chongsheng's plans. The area in front of the Orthodox Academy grew quiet. Only his voice could be heard. If words could be said to contain swords, then his words were the swords Chun Chongsheng had prepared for Yi Xingqing. Just like in the previous 2 matches, the commoners of the capital who had come to watch the excitement naturally did not understand. The Li Palace priests and the experts who had come to challenge the Orthodox Academy grew more and more silent as they listened. Yi Xingqing's face gradually paled. Chun Chongsheng's swords were hidden in Tang 36's words, directly piercing through the characteristics of his technique and accurately finding his weakness. And now, countless people had heard these words. It did not matter how many swords there were, as long as they were sharp enough. Chun Chongsheng's plan was also very simple, as long as it was effective. It didn't take long for Tang 36 to finish. The area in front of the Orthodox Academy was still quiet, even deathly still. Only after a long time had passed did Su Mou sigh. "I'm inferior to him." This was a sigh that came from the bottom of his heart. It was also what many people were thinking. "Do you have confidence now?" Tang 36 asked. Su Mou gave him a strange glance, then said, "I said I was inferior to Chun Chongsheng. When did I say I had no confidence in this battle?" Tang 36 thought to himself, "Then why didn't you respond to my words just now?" In truth, even if Su Mou had said he was confident, he would still have found an opportunity to speak of the plan Chun Chongsheng had prepared last night. The common people had always believed that Chun Chongsheng's ability to cultivate to such a level at such a young age was primarily due to his background in the orthodoxy and those fortuitous encounters. As a result, they had underestimated his talent in cultivation and his diligence. He felt that this was wrong. He believed that Chun Chongsheng's genius was worthy of praise and even reverence. There was another very important reason, and that was that he did not like Yi Xingqing, so he wanted to expose the secrets and weaknesses of his cultivation technique in broad daylight. "Then go fight," Tang 36 said to Su Mou. "Fight until even his young master can't recognize him." As a former genius of the Li Palace Academy and someone who had spent half a year in the mausoleum of books viewing the monoliths, Su Mou was already rather powerful. Coupled with the fact that he had used Chun Chongsheng's plan without any mental barriers, and the fact that Yi Xingqing's performance in this battle was far below what people imagined, this battle unsurprisingly ended with Su Mou's victory. As for whether Yi Xingqing had been beaten until even his young master couldn't recognize him, one would have to ask Tianxin himself. In any case, based on what Su Mou had said, he probably couldn't recognize him. The conclusion of the 3rd match was also very quick. Including the time taken to speak with those people, it was not very long. The morning light had just faded, and the blazing sun was about to rise. Tang 36 brought Su Mou and the several dozen new students back to the Orthodox Academy, leaving only the tightly shut gate to those unsatisfied populace and those speechless challengers. The reason Tang 36 used was very simple. Friends had returned from the mausoleum of books, so they had to first eat a feast and reminisce about old times. As for a minor matter, like the all-school martial exhibition, they could continue after eating. Many students sat on the grass by the lake, books in their hands as they read. Not far away, under a nearby tree were Clear Lake Restaurant's famous rose ice cubes, which the students casually scooped up. Seeing this scene, Su Mou was very sorrowful. "This is a little too extravagant," Tang 36 replied. "You won't regret joining the Orthodox Academy." In front of the grass by the lake was a clearly newly built wall. This wall was rather short, unable to block out the scenery within, and of course, it was even less capable of blocking out the great banyan tree. It could only serve as a barrier. The forest on the other side of the short wall was even denser and more secluded. There were not many people around. Hidden in the green forest was a small building. Chen Changsheng was waiting in front of the building. He looked at Su Mo and said, "You've come." Su Mo noticed his complexion and said, "You seem very tired." Chen Changsheng truly was very tired. In the past few days, he had been studying those opponents, searching for flaws, guiding the new students of the Orthodox Academy, and coming up with plans. In reality, this was equivalent to constantly using the intellectual sword. Moreover, he was in a rush to re-enter the Garden of Zhou, and every night, he had to undergo many attempts. The consumption of his spiritual sense was too severe, and he was on the verge of collapse. "You can say it now." Tang 36 looked at Su Mo and asked, "Why did you come to the Orthodox Academy?" On that night, when they saw Su Mo's name on the list of applicants, he and Chen Changsheng were both very shocked and somewhat worried. There were also a few students from the Ivy Academies that had transferred here, but they were all students that were not valued. Su Mo was different. He had been the focus of the Li Palace Academy's training for the past 2 years, but in the end, after coming out of the Mausoleum of Books, he did not even greet the Li Palace Academy before coming to the Orthodox Academy. If this matter were to get out, it would definitely provoke some trouble. "I came to hide from trouble." Su Mo had no intention of concealing anything, directly saying, "The storm you caused in the capital is too great. Even in the Mausoleum of Books, I knew about it. If I return to the Li Palace Academy, the arrangements that await me will definitely be to represent the Li Palace Academy in challenging you. I only like reading and cultivating. I don't like doing these things." Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 understood. Daoist Siyuan was one of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects and a representative of the Orthodoxy's new faction. At the same time, he was also the Li Palace Academy's greatest backer. Bi Qianxin, who was already at the middle level of star condensation, had insisted on challenging the Orthodox Academy in spite of the discussions because his parents were old friends with Daoist Siyuan. If Su Mo returned to the Li Palace Academy, he would definitely not be able to avoid these arrangements. Tang 36 was still somewhat confused. "You don't like fighting, so why did you take the initiative to represent the Orthodox Academy?" Su Mo replied, "Because he's a member of the Beef family." Tang 36 replied, "It's precisely because he's a member of the Beef family that it's rather troublesome to deal with. So I was originally somewhat hesitant. Bullying the weak and fearing the strong is wrong." Su Mo seriously said to him, "That's reasonable." The more Tang 36 looked at him, the more he found him pleasing to the eye, even somewhat admiring. Su Mo added, "And I just said to you, this match should be fought by me." Tang 36 recalled that he truly had said this before. Now that he thought about it, these words truly were rather strange. What did he mean by he should be the one to fight? Why? Because Bi Tianxin is my cousin. Chapter 484. Tang 36 was quiet for a while, then asked, "Then who is Bianghong?" Su Mo replied, "My uncle." Tang 36 took in a deep breath, then asked, "Wu Qiongbai?" Su Mo thought, "Is there even a need to ask? Of course it's my aunt." There was a rather awkward silence. Tang 36 looked at him and said, "In the future, can you say something like this a little earlier?" Su Mo replied, "No one has ever asked me. I can't just meet a person and tell them that my uncle is Bianghong." Chen Changxing nodded. "That's reasonable." Tang 36 glanced at him and said, "I still haven't said that you hid your engagement with Su Yurong from us. Don't be in such a hurry to find some alliance." He then turned to Su Moyu and said, "Continue." When Aunt was in the Li Palace Academy, she was like a sister to Archbishop Siyuan, so she naturally stood on his side. Moreover, she's very protective. After all, he was talking about his elder, so Su Moyu's expression was rather unnatural. If cousin really did fight with you, no matter who won or lost, it wouldn't be easy to clean up. It would be best if Aunt also came to the capital. Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 glanced at each other, then said in unison, "There's no need. Quickly write a letter to your uncle saying that everything is fine." Su Moyu replied, "There's no need. My uncle wrote me a letter." "What? Or else how could I have come out of the Mausoleum of Books?" Su Moyu thought of the contents of the letter and felt rather helpless. "Uncle, you're henpecked, but am I not afraid of Ant? Uncle wanted me to enter the Orthodox Academy." He continued, "So I came." At this point, Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 finally understood the entire matter. Bi Yanghong knew that his wife supported the Orthodoxy's new faction. Now that Bi Tianxin was representing the Li Palace Academy and challenging the Orthodox Academy. If he won, the Bi clan would naturally offend the Pope, the Wenshui Tangs, and even Su Li and those two saints of White Emperor City. But if he lost, his wife, who was protective of him, might come to the capital and stir up a storm. He did not want this sort of thing to happen. Perhaps it was because he supported the conservative faction of the Orthodoxy, or perhaps it was simply because he did not want to participate in this storm. As a result, he wrote a letter to Su Moyu in the Mausoleum of Books, telling his dearest nephew to leave seclusion early and enter the Orthodox Academy, doing his utmost to make this matter disappear without a trace. It had to be said that Bi Yanghong's method was very wise. When his wife stood on the side of the Orthodoxy's new faction, he had Su Moyu represent him in expressing goodwill to the other side, or at least a desire to calm the situation. In this way, with the status and strength of the two of them, the other clans would probably not be affected by this storm. This was the principle behind the saying that only by staying uninvolved could one stand proudly in the world. But in this way, one point became very obvious. Wu Qianbai had clearly not asked for his opinion on this matter, or perhaps she had not listened to his advice. The storms of the 8 directions, loving husband and wife, rumored to be a celestial couple, but it turned out they also had their own thoughts. When he thought of this, Qin Changsheng couldn't help but feel somewhat sorrowful. Tang 36, on the other hand, was much more direct. He looked at Su Moyu and asked, "Your uncle and aunt don't have a good relationship, do they?" The atmosphere grew cold once more. Su Moyu looked at him in silence. "Pretend I didn't say anything." Tang 36 smiled at him and said, "If that's the case, then you could be considered the young master of the Bi clan. No wonder that fellow looked at you with a strange expression. That's right. If the young master were to teach a servant a lesson, would he dare to retaliate?" Su Moyu very seriously corrected him. "Even if he used his full strength, I could still defeat him." Then he turned to Chun Changsheng and sighed. "You truly are extraordinary." Qin Changsheng felt somewhat embarrassed. Tang 36 didn't feel embarrassed. He put his arm around Chun Changsheng's shoulder and said, "Your uncle's intention in having you enter Orthodox Academy is now very clear. You've already taught a lesson to a servant today. In 2 days, if your cousin comes to cause trouble again, you better not hide." Su Moyu thought to himself, "These are the words. The meaning is also the same, but why is it that everything that comes out of your mouth is always so piercing to the ear?" He really didn't know how to respond. Looking at the quiet surroundings of the little building, he asked, "This place is rather quiet. Normal students can't come here. You saw that short wall just now. But of course you're not a normal student. Yesterday, Xin Yuan Pa had already tidied up your room. I'll take you to see in a moment. How about it? We've given you quite a good treatment, right?" Tang 36 thought of a coincidence and laughed. "You're the young master of the Bi clan. The garden that's separated by the wall is called Bi Garden. Don't you think it's destined that you will be transferred to our Orthodox Academy, and that you'll have to live here?" Su Moyu didn't even think about this. He shook his head and said, "We're all students. It's not appropriate for us to enjoy special treatment. He's the principal. I'm the superintendent. Xin Yuan Pa is the manager. Zhishou's position has already been arranged, but his name hasn't been decided yet. Princess Luo Luo is the lifelong honorary vice principal. In short, we're all not normal students. You can name whatever position you want. But I still think we're all young people. Why do we need to be separated by a wall?" "Because Qin Changsheng said he likes peace and quiet. I think he has too many secrets and is afraid of being discovered." Hearing this, Qin Changsheng could no longer maintain his silence. He explained to Su Moyu, cultivation requires peace and quiet. If there are any new students that have successfully broken through to ethereal opening, they can also move to Bi Garden. If they can place within the top 3 in the grand examination, they also have the right to move in. According to Tang Tang, it also has a sense of motivation. Hearing this, Su Moyu felt that it was a good idea. He asked, What's everyone's reaction? He was used to leading his fellow students at Lee Palace College. Today, upon arriving at Orthodox Academy, he subconsciously began to consider these matters. Tang 36 looked towards the young students that were either sitting or lying on the grassy ground by the lake. He said, "They're all students that came from provinces, counties, or even rural areas, or invisible people that have been neglected by the Ivy Academies for a long time. Being able to pass the preliminary stage of the grand examination makes them want nothing more than to offer sacrifices to the sea of stars and worship the Empress. How could they dare hope to place within the top 3 in the grand examination? As for breaking through to ethereal opening, that's even more unthinkable." Therefore, no one paid attention to what we said. They only felt that we were drawing a large cake for them to see, some even grumbling. Sumoyu thought about how Chun Changsheng had broken through to ethereal opening during the grand examination, shocking the entire continent. Then thought about how, after that night at the Mausoleum of Books, ethereal openings seemed to have become a common occurrence. He subconsciously glanced at Tang 36, thinking to himself, just how many people had clearly understood what benefits Chun Changsheng had brought to the younger generation of cultivators. Tang 36 looked towards the grassy ground and said, "Actually, I can understand why they think that way, but I still feel that they're useless. So yesterday, I gathered them together and gave them a good scolding." Chun Changsheng shook his head. He definitely didn't want to experience that again. Even if it was just to recall what had happened the night before, he had never seen anyone curse like Tang 36 in his life. Su Moyu strongly disapproved of this teaching philosophy. He shook his head and said, "Cursing people is wrong. I didn't say a single curse word, just like when you stopped us on the Divine Avenue of Lee Palace." The Divine Avenue of Lee Palace. Su Moyu was a little emotional. He gave Chun Changsheng a look, a little apologetic. "I told them last year at this time on the Divine Avenue of Lee Palace." Chun Changsheng told the entire world that he wanted to take first place in the grand examination, and that at that time he hadn't even completed his purification. Everyone thought he was a lunatic. And the result? The result was that he really did what everyone thought was impossible. Tang 36 said, "Then how could anything in this world be truly impossible? What does it matter if it's the top 3 in the grand examination or breaking through to ethereal opening?" Su Moyu thought about it and said, "That makes sense." The two escorted Su Moyu back to his room, had him rest, and then left. Walking out of the small building, Tang 36 said with absolute certainty, "There's definitely a problem with his uncle and aunt's relationship. If there's a problem, then solve the problem. The 25th is getting closer and closer. I hope I can make the days of 2 chapters last longer, work harder." Chapter 485. You actually still haven't forgotten? Chun Changsheng sighed in amazement. That husband and wife are both members of the Storms of the 8 Directions. Who wouldn't be interested in their affairs? In truth, I even suspect that Wu Qiong had an affair with Daoist Siyuan back in the Lee Palace Academy. Otherwise, why would she send her own son to fight in Daoist Siyuan's place? And why would Yang Hong be so vigilant, sending Su Moyu into the Orthodox Academy to bear the brunt? Tang 36 walked to the lakeshore and said, "But now that I think about it, that idiot Bi Tianxin is Wu Qiong Bai's son, but he's not necessarily Bi Yang Hong's son. Do you think he might be Daoist Siyuan's son?" Sigh. But this matter involves a private matter, so it can't be spread around, especially if Su Moyu hears of it. After all, it's his own uncle. How embarrassing. He turned to his side and realized that there was no one there. At some point, Chun Changsheng had left and was now on the grass on the other side of the wall. Confused, he asked, "What are you doing?" Chun Changsheng didn't even turn his head. Waving his hand, he said, "I'm going to see if the meal is ready." The 3 matches that had begun in the early morning had all concluded very quickly. Lunch had been brought forward, and after eating, there was still time to take a nap. Only when the sun had moved a certain distance from its zenith to the west, and the stifling heat was somewhat relieved, did the gate of the Orthodox Academy open once more. It was still Tang 36 leading the group. The new students of the Orthodox Academy stood behind him on the stone steps, their faces brimming with excitement and unease. Without any surprises, the first student of the Orthodox Academy to fight lost. Just when the opponent's sword was about to descend, Tang 36's voice very promptly rang out. It ends here. The second match was lost, the third was also lost, and in the following matches, the Orthodox Academy lost very straightforwardly. The usually bustling atmosphere of the arena was now rather oppressive. Only the voices of Tang 36 and the new students of the Orthodox Academy could be heard. It's about time. I say, it's about time, son. I say, why don't you listen? These were Tang 36's words. He was speaking to those people who had come to challenge the Orthodox Academy. The words of the new students of the Orthodox Academy were even simpler, not exceeding 5 words. Concede. I concede. I admit defeat. Only when they reached the gate of the Homecoming Academy and shook off the tension and unfamiliarity from the previous battle did they speak a little more, standing on the stone steps and chatting with their classmates. Was there a problem with the sword I used just now? Didn't the dean say last night that your opponent's weakness is speed? That's why your sword should be faster. As fast as I can. It means that you haven't practiced the 3 moves of Plum Blossom well enough. Dean, you mentioned that there's another sword technique that can restrain this person. What is it again? The 3 chants of the Fisherman's Song is a powerful sword technique of the Mountly Sword sect. I heard that even Liang Ban, who is unable to grasp it. It is Go Hanshi's ultimate technique. With our current cultivation levels, it is impossible for us to learn it. The new students of the Orthodox Academy discussed. There is no sign of defeat on their faces. Consecutive defeats didn't seem to affect their moods at all. The servant of the bee family was actually right. Swords have no eyes, especially in this kind of battle where the difference in strength was too great. No matter how sharp Tang 36's eyes were, no matter how timely he shouted, it was still unavoidable for some accidents to occur. But that really couldn't be blamed on those experts who challenged the Orthodox Academy. It was basically the result of the new students being too nervous. When dusk began to rise, the Orthodox Academy had already lost 10-odd matches. 6 new students were injured, and 2 of them were rather heavily injured. But these students didn't have any complaints, and they didn't mention Tang 36's promise a few days ago that they wouldn't be affected. On the contrary, they were grateful, because they knew better than anyone else how much progress they had made with Chun Changsheng's guidance, and such a rare opportunity to fight against experts. Just their horizons were many times broader than before they entered the academy. The duels of the Orthodox Academy that caused a great disturbance in the capital and brought much excitement to the common people finally entered a new stage today. The Orthodox Academy began to lose, but no one believed that they were the losers because the representatives of the Orthodox Academy were all the new students that had been recruited a few days ago. Of course, there were no victors. The mood of the new students of the Orthodox Academy was very good, and Tang 36 was basically satisfied with the current situation. But seeing this sort of perfunctory battle, the crowd that had come to watch the excitement felt very bored. They were bored to the point of panic, and some people even began to feel sleepy and yawn. The most depressed were the experts from the Tianhai clan and the Ivy Academies. They realized that they had completely become sparring partners, and a few of them had actually slipped up and accidentally injured the new students of the Orthodox Academy. When they thought of the threat Tang 36 had uttered this morning, they even felt somewhat uneasy. Only when they saw that Tang 36's complexion was normal did they relax and bitterly smile as they retreated. Dusk gradually darkened, and the gates of the Orthodox Academy closed. The majority of the priests from the Li Palace returned to their halls, leaving behind only the night watchmen and a squadron of Orthodoxy cavalry. The common people of the capital resentfully returned home to prepare dinner. Under the canopy, the stewards of the 4 great markets looked at today's bets and tightly creased their brows. Those experts that had challenged the Orthodox Academy felt the most inexplicably irritated. After dinner was over, the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy began to summarize and simultaneously prepare for tomorrow's matches. After everything was done, Chun Changsheng and the others returned to the separate garden. Today, Xin Yuanpa had spent the entire day with the head chef of Clear Lake Restaurant. In his view, The liveliness in the kitchen and the pots and pans, those methods of cooking ingredients that he had never even heard of before, were far more important than the liveliness outside the gate. Only when he was summarizing just now did he understand the situation of today's matches outside the gate. Somewhat confused, he asked, if conceding defeat could solve the problem, why do we need to recruit so many new students? We could just directly concede defeat. Tang 36 said, I see that you've always had a problem with the Orthodox Academy's recruitment of new students. Why? Xin Yuan replied, why don't you take a look at the lunch and dinner? Such good dishes were all eaten up by them. See, this is the reason why I did what I did. Tang 36 looked at him and said, because you can afford to lose that person, but I can't. Xin Yuan didn't quite understand, but after thinking it over, he understood that this way of speaking was called a double entendre. I'm someone who wants to reach 58 consecutive victories. How can I stop here? Tang 36 finally said. Chen Changshan glanced at him and knew that the matter was definitely not so simple. Chapter 486. In the next few days, the matches in front of the Orthodox Academy continued. The ones representing the Orthodox Academy were still the new students. These new students had already completed their purification. Of course, they could not be said to be completely powerless, but how could they compare to the true experts of the Tianhai family and the Ivy schools? The new students were very clear about their own level. Following Chen Changsheng's instructions, they went on stage and displayed everything they had time to display, experienced everything they wanted to experience, and then conceded. It was a bit like tasting and stopping, but it could also be said that they quit while they were ahead. In short, after 2 or 3 strikes, they would simply concede. This became the most common scene in front of the Orthodox Academy. Until the end, the normal experts of the Tianhai family and the Ivy schools had all won around. Only a few true experts remained. The person who came to the field at this time was a star condensation expert from the Temple Seminary. He was an ascetic priest. He was originally cultivating his body in the Northwest, but he was unexpectedly called back by the 2 Holy Church archbishops. This ascetic priest wore a bamboo hat. Even in the scorching summer weather, he still wore coarse, cotton clothing. The shadow of the bamboo hat covered his face, and only his 2 eyes that exuded a harsh aura could be seen. He looked at Tang 36 and said expressionlessly, today, Principal Chun will probably personally teach you, right? From their titles, it was actually possible to see the true affiliation of the experts who challenged the Orthodox Academy. Those who nominally belonged to the Ivy schools, but in reality were experts of the Tianhai family, that they basically all called Chen Changsheng by his name. As for the true experts of the Ivy schools, even if they did not have a good impression of Chen Changsheng, they still had to strictly follow the sacred order of the orthodoxy and respectfully call him principal. My apologies. Principal Chun has used up too much of his mental energy these past few days. He is currently studying in the academy to recover. Tang 36 looked at this famous ascetic priest in Wen Shui and smiled. Priest Bei, your eminence's opponent today is someone else. The ascetic priest gaze pierced through the shadow of the bamboo hat and landed on Tang 36's face. He said solemnly, I heard that Master Tang broke through 3 levels in the Mausoleum of Books. If you can experience it, it will be a worthwhile trip. From the distant northwest to the capital, it truly was a very long journey. From this, one could also see that Daoist Siyuan and Linghai Zhuang, these 2 prefects of the orthodoxy, had long ago begun preparing to suppress the Orthodox Academy. His opponent's gaze fell on his face. Tang 36 actually felt a slight pain. He squinted his eyes and thought, an opponent as strong as you, I don't have the confidence to win. Even if I win, I'm afraid I'll be heavily injured. Your opponent is not me, but him. He looked at the ascetic priest and solemnly introduced, he is the student with the greatest talent in cultivation among this batch of students of the Orthodox Academy. Following his hand gesture, a young student walked down the stone steps. That student was indeed very young, too young. It would be more accurate to say that he was a teenager, no more than 13 or 14 years old. His expression was nervous, and his originally lively eyes were now somewhat lifeless. Looking at this youth, the ascetic was stunned and said, If I am not wrong, this child should have just completed purification. Tang 36 praised. As expected, a priest Bei, who bitterly cultivates and comprehends the Tao. Your eyes are truly like torches. Your judgment is not wrong. This child completed purification 3 months ago. This time, he came to the capital in preparation to participate in the preparatory examination of the grand examination to test his luck. The area in front of the Orthodox Academy was no longer as bustling as it was a few days ago, but there were still quite a few people. When they saw the illustrious priest, Bei, personally appear, they were shocked and in the midst of their discussions. Suddenly, they realized that the opponent that the Orthodox Academy had arranged for Priest Bei was actually this kind of youth. The crowd instantly became incomparably quiet, thinking, just what sort of trick is the Orthodox Academy playing? Your meaning is, my opponent is this child? Priest Bei's voice naturally became angry as he harshly rebuked. You are insulting me. Tang 36's expression did not change as he smiled and said, Priest's words are incorrect. The purpose of the all-school martial exhibition, besides competing with one another, is also for the seniors to instruct the juniors. This child truly is the most talented new student in our Orthodox Academy. Although he has never sparred with anyone before and is very nervous, he still dares to stand out and ask the seniors to instruct him. How can this be considered an insult? An extremely powerful chi exuded from the edge of the bamboo hat. Priest Bei forcefully suppressed his anger and said, Please respect me. Tang 36 slowly restrained his smile and calmly said to him, Priest's words sound rather familiar, very similar to those officials of the department for purging officials who boast of their integrity. Priest Bei stared into his eyes and harshly rebuked. You actually compare me to those ruthless officials. I used to respect Sir very much. Tang 36 paused, then continued. But now that Sir has returned to the capital, it's truly impossible for me to respect you again. Priest Bei's gaze moved back and forth between him and the Orthodox Academy youth. You clearly know that I can't do anything to him. Tang 36 said, Because Sir is a gentleman. Priest Bei said, So you specifically chose this child to deal with me? Tang 36 didn't deny it, saying, I won't hide it from Sir, the vast majority of the matchups were decided by Chun Chong Sheng. Only your match was decided by me. After a moment of silence, Priest Bei sighed and said, In today's world, is it really the petty people who rule? Saying this, he turned around and prepared to leave. Tang 36 originally didn't intend to say anything more, but seeing the somewhat desolate back of the famed ascetic priest of the Northwest, he couldn't help but open his mouth. A gentleman could be deceived with methods, but of course this isn't necessarily correct. Although I'm not a gentleman, I'm also not a petty person. But since Sir, who was once a gentleman, has been used by a petty person to do ungentlemanly things, then I naturally can only respond in the manner of a petty person. Hearing these words, Priest Bei seemed to be struck by lightning, his body slightly stiffening. After a moment, he once again raised his foot and walked back into the crowd. Seeing the gradually fading figure on the distant street and the increasingly small bamboo hat, Tang 36 was calm and silent. Remember, this match is our Orthodox Academy's victory. Not waiting for the crowd to boo, he calmly said, Next. Not every match had a story, and not every story could leave behind a meaningful conclusion. The match in front of the Orthodox Academy continued. Without blood and without the shadow of death, it naturally lost much of its excitement, becoming more and more depressing. To the common people, if there were no such things, no scenes of mountains collapsing and the heavens shattering, the fights of the continent's experts that had stepped into the divine domain would be no different from the fights of those naughty children on the streets. It was just that they were a little stronger. Only those who could understand would be able to understand the information revealed in the battle. Of the new students representing the Orthodox Academy, other than the special circumstances of Su Mou and that youth, although the other new students had yet to obtain a single victory and could not even see the possibility of victory, in these extremely short matches, they were often able to display unimaginable sword techniques and transformations. although everyone knew that this was because they had received Chun Chang Sheng's guidance. For these new students to be able to realize it, they had already displayed a certain possibility. These children from the provinces and countryside, these poor students that no one from the Ivy Academies paid any attention to, had suddenly become different. Besides the common people that had come to watch the matches in front of the Orthodox Academy, there were also many teachers and students of the Ivy Academies that had changed into uniforms. They looked at the new students of the Orthodox Academy on the stone steps, not daring to believe their eyes. Was this the incomparably mischievous Wei Chong that they had once taught? Was this the Chu Wenbin that only knew how to sleep every day? Compared to the past, the new students of the Orthodox Academy seemed to have gained a new luster. Crucially, their minds were different. They were confident and calm, as if nothing could stump them. Even the seemingly endless failures were not frightening. They still firmly believed that they would be able to obtain the final victory. When all these things were combined together, they formed a temperament called calmness. Because of calmness, they were calm. Only then could they talk and laugh in front of the crowd, no longer feeling nervous or inferior because of the ridicule or disregard of others. If last year, when Chun Chang Sheng became a new student of the Orthodox Academy, then when Luo, Xin Yuan Pa, Tang 36, and Zhixiu joined the Orthodox Academy one after another, it could be said that the Orthodox Academy was reborn. Just like these young students, or, in other words, it was because of their arrival. The change of these young students, of course, originated from the Orthodox Academy. The two most important people were Chun Chang Sheng and Tang 36. Putting Tang 36 aside, everyone could see Chun Chang Sheng's importance. If it wasn't for his endless guidance every night and the large amount of mental energy spent on studying the techniques and weaknesses of those experts, how could the new students of the Orthodox Academy have the courage to face those experts who were several levels higher than them? How could they have so much confidence? After recruiting new students from the Orthodox Academy, Chun Chang Sheng never fought again. He didn't even go to the outside of the academy to take a look, but everyone in the capital knew that he had always been watching the outside from the Orthodox Academy. Through these dozens of matches, he displayed his unimaginable talent in the way of the sword to his heart's content. That kind of talent in the way of the sword was so strong, that kind of talent was so dazzling that the entire capital was once again shaken. Starting from the same moment last summer, he had already brought too much shock to the capital and even the entire human world. The Ivy Festival, the Grand Examination, the Mausoleum of Books, the Garden of Zhou, Sunyang City. Many people thought that they were already numb from the shock of Chun Chang Sheng. No matter what he did in the future, it wouldn't be surprising, but this time they were still shocked once again. With Chun Chang Sheng's age, being able to have such an unfathomable level of cultivation in the way of the sword was something very hard to imagine. What was even harder to imagine was that he could also teach others how to learn the sword. It must be known that this wasn't as simple as teaching a child how to write, teaching and dispelling doubts. This was a teacher. The current Chun Chang Sheng actually had the faint air of a grandmaster, because his age was truly too young. Every time people had this kind of thought, they would shake their heads and deny it. But no one dared to deny that if he was given more time, such as another 10-some years, once he truly matured, perhaps he really could become the principal of the Orthodox Academy in name and in reality. While everyone's gazes were on the Orthodox Academy, sighing in admiration at Chun Chang Sheng's cultivation in the way of the sword, only one person remained unconvinced. It's just messing around. Mou gazed at the Empress's back, somewhat bored as she fiddled with the grass ring on her finger. I also don't know why those people in the imperial court and the Li Palace are making such a fuss over nothing. The sentence, "Please respect me," was naturally written, but when I wrote the second sentence, "You're insulting me," I realized that I was very affected by that advertisement. There are still 3 days until the 25th. I will very naturally and earnestly do it. I will probably leave on the 27th. Chapter 487. Before Qiushan Jun, Mou was the youngest fusion star cultivator in the world. Of course, she had the right to show her disdain and ridicule the so-called Xiuxing geniuses. The Divine Queen glanced at her and said, You really think Chen Changsheng is messing around? Mou's fingers stiffened. Just like many important figures, she also secretly went to the gate of the Tradition Academy. Of course, those battles were nothing in her eyes, but she had to admit that the talent Chen Changsheng displayed through the swords of the new students of the Tradition Academy, no matter if it was her when he was the same age or the current her, she couldn't compare to him. This was the Divine Queen's question, so she couldn't lie. She lightly bit her lower lip and said, "I'm talking about Tang Tang." Everyone's eyes are on Chen Changsheng. They think Tang 36 is messing around. Do you think so too? Although the Divine Empress knew that she was speaking casually, she was still not satisfied with her view. She said, "Cheng Wu and the two archbishops have prepared for 3 months. Who knows how many contingency plans they have prepared. No matter how the Li Palace responds, they will always have a way to make the matter bigger. However, up until now, have you ever seen the Li Palace express its stance or take action?" Of course, Mou knew the intention of the Tianhai family and the two archbishops. Tianhai Chengwu said to Su Shiji that he wanted to take advantage of the situation and wait for Su Yurong to return to the capital. Of course, it wasn't the truth, at least not the whole truth. For such an important figure like him, the matter that he cooperated with the two archbishops couldn't be so petty. The Ivy schools challenging the Tradition Academy was only the prelude to a big event. Mou originally thought that the Pope would suppress this matter before it exploded. She didn't expect that the Pope would still keep silent. This surprised her. Now she was reminded by the Divine Queen. Only now did she understand why the Li Palace had never expressed its stance, why the matter of the Orthodox Academy had always been confined to the Orthodox Academy, and not spread to the Li Palace as the Tianhai clan and the two Sacred Hall archbishops had planned at the very beginning, thus turning the all-school martial exhibition into a confrontation between the new and conservative factions of the Orthodoxy? Because of a very simple reason. The Tradition Academy took care of this matter itself. Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 simply did not need the Li Palace to express its stance, did not need the Pope to say anything, and had already beautifully completed this matter. When the Tianhai clan and the two archbishops of the Holy Church had decided to push for this matter, they had probably never thought that what they thought was just a formality would forever become a formality because of these two youngsters. That big event was just the beginning, and it seemed like it couldn't go any further. As long as the Orthodox Academy can hold on, the Pope will not speak. The Divine Empress walked to the side of the stage and gazed at the nearby Tradition Academy, which was gradually becoming brighter. She said countless backup plans were all destroyed by Tang Tang alone. If the Pope had any thoughts towards Chen Changsheng, they were also destroyed by him. Do you still think he's just messing around? Mou was speechless. She really didn't think that Tang 36, who seemed to be frivolous and useless, could actually see through the schemes of so many powerful figures. It really is the age of blooming wildflowers. The Divine Empress said, Tang Tang is not bad, and Chen Changsheng is even better. If they're given enough time and opportunity, what do we need to worry about the future of the Zhou dynasty and humanity? If there was only one wildflower, and it bloomed alone on the cliff, how could it be called beautiful? Only when many wildflowers bloomed together could it be called blooming, and only then could it be breathtakingly beautiful. Thinking about the changes in the past year, Mo, you had to admit that the reason why the Tradition Academy showed signs of revival so quickly, besides Chen Changsheng, the most important point was that Tang 36 left the Heavenly Academy and entered the Tradition Academy. If the Divine Empress judgment was correct, Tang 36 seemingly messing around was actually a calm response. Then it could be said that the Tradition Academy needed people like him the most. She knew the situation when Chen Changsheng and Tang 36 first met. At that time, Tang 36 was a famous genius youngster, and Chen Changsheng was a little Taoist from the countryside that no one knew about. They met when they were applying for the Heavenly Academy, and it was Tang 36 who talked to Chen Changsheng first. Now that you think about it, you have to admit that this kind of meeting really had a taste of fate. What's the most amazing thing about the Wenshui Tang family? It's not wealth, nor is it strategy, but insight. The Divine Empress gazed at the brightly lit Tradition Academy and said, "The Tang Old Master was the first person to see Su Li's ability, and in the following several hundred years, who dared to disrespect the Tang clan? Even the storms of the 8 directions were the same." Later on, the Tang clan withstood the pressure of the imperial court and had Wangpa serve as an accountant for 10 years, presumably in exchange for several more decades of peace. Now that Tang Tang and Chun Changsheng have this sort of friendship, if Chun Changsheng really does become pope, the position of the One Shui Tang clan will be even more unshakable. For some reason, and Mo Yu said, if that's the case, then Chun Changsheng is actually inferior to Tang Tang. Girls truly are outgoing. The Divine Empress gave her a meaningful glance, and Mo Yu felt somewhat wronged, but she didn't dare say anything. The Divine Empress said, "The Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets has sent someone to see the sword. Since you know Chun Changsheng, you should bring him. Otherwise, with Chun Changsheng's personality, you really might not be able to see it." Different from the past year, different from the past 20 years, tonight, the Tradition Academy was brightly lit. Even though it was very late, people could still be seen, and sound could be heard in the forest by the lake and by the fountains. Qin Changsheng was somewhat enthused to this change. He shook his head and thought of the matter they talked about in the morning. He turned to Tang 36 and said, "The story you told me 2 days ago wasn't correct. I never said that I would take first place of the first banner in the grand examination. At the time, Su Mo Yu was on the Divine Avenue, so he should remember it very clearly. It was the Archbishop who said it. I don't understand why he would forget such an important matter. This means that in everyone's impression, you were the one who said it, so don't try to explain yourself." Tang 36 said, "And I remember very clearly, in the Plum Garden Inn, you personally said this to me." Because of these words, the two of them simultaneously recalled the scene of them treating each other to a meal in the inn. At that time, they had imitated the manners of adults and exchanged pleasantries, but now that they thought about it, it was a scene of immaturity. The two looked at each other and laughed. Not much time seemed to have passed, but too many things had already changed. 1 year ago, the Tradition Academy was still very cold and desolate. Although it had been cleaned and renovated by the Department of Traditional Education, other than the area he frequented, the other areas were still very cold. Especially at night, it was like a graveyard. 1 year later, the Orthodox Academy welcomed many new students brimming with vitality. The cold and cheerless night had long been driven away by the lights of the dormitories. In a library that was once only occupied by one person for a very long time, there were now many people borrowing the light to read. Many people saw these changes, and every time they thought about how Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 were able to make the Tradition Academy look so good at such a young age, they couldn't help but feel a little surprised and then praise them. But Qin Changsheng's thoughts weren't here. He looked at Tang 36 and asked, "Why did you do all this?" "Today is the wedding day of the fan clubs Feng Lian Wan and Wan Wan. I've already carefully admired their wedding photos. Their faces are full of happiness. I wish the young couple a happy wedding. Don't fight over washing dishes." Chapter 488. I said I will drown them. This is what I mean by drowning the 7 armies. At some point, the folding fan in Tang 36's hand had been replaced with a green apple. Holding the green apple, he pointed at the lights in the library and the silhouettes left behind by the new students. The Orthodox Academy has so many people. It won't be so easy for them to exhaust us to death. On the contrary, I can exhaust them to death. Qin Changsheng shook his head and said, "I don't believe it." Tang 36 was silent for a while and said, "This is the beginning." "Beginning?" Qin Changsheng really didn't understand. "Your beginning is also the beginning of the Tradition Academy. This place always needs to recruit students." Tang 36 looked at the academy in the night and said, "The Tradition Academy for one person sounds cool, but in reality, it's not the Tradition Academy. It's just you." Then it became 2 people, 3 people, 3 people, for people. But it's not the Tradition Academy. Only now is the Tradition Academy. The night was getting late, but the lights were still bright. Chun Changsheng followed his line of sight and murmured, "But what do we need so many people for?" There's strength in numbers. Tang 36 looked at him and said, right now they are still very weak and very young, but what about in the future? In the future? Chun Chang Shang kind of understood, but he really didn't think about the future because he was used to looking at the people before the age of 20. But right now, looking at the Tradition Academy that was brightly lit, looking at the new students who were quietly reading by the window, looking at the back of the young boys and girls by the lake, he remembered the old scenes he imagined when he first entered the Tradition Academy. Those young boys and girls who used to study in this academy and look at the lake dozens of years ago. His face gradually showed a smile. He thought that no matter what would happen in the future, this was good. Didn't you see that the forest that had been silent for so many years seems to have woken up? Tang 36 said, don't forget, in the future, you will be the Pope. The entire continent knew that Chun Changsheng would become the Pope in the future, but only he himself did not have any real feelings about this matter. He felt that it was too far away, and he had never thought that he was already the principal of the Orthodox Academy, only a few steps away from ascending to the limitless throne of Pope. His actual authority was naturally far inferior to Mao, Qiuyu, and Dao Siyuan, but purely in terms of the divine sequence, he was already completely equal to them. According to Archbishop Mei Sha's words, the current Chun Chang Sheng only needed to bow to His Holiness. No one else needed to do so. Pope is not easy. Of course it's not easy, Tang 36 replied. If His Holiness the Pope did not stand behind you, powerful figures like Dao Siyuan and Linghai Zhuang would be able to crush you with a single finger. In truth, I believe that the most important reason they so firmly stand with the Tianhai clan is because His Holiness the Pope has chosen you as his successor. If you want to become the Pope in the future, it will not be such a simple matter. Chun Changsheng thought about the recent undercurrents within the heavenly orthodoxy, thought about the all-school martial exhibition proposal that was clearly aimed at the Orthodox Academy, and knew that Tang 36's conjecture was correct. Compared to Linghai Zhuang and the other true prefects of the Orthodoxy, besides the support of His Holiness the Pope and the legacy of Archbishop Mei Sha, he had no foundation within the Orthodoxy. If he wanted to become the next Pope, he would inevitably have to endure countless problems and challenges in the years to come. How could he handle them? The Orthodox Academy is your foundation. In the next few decades, the teachers and students that walk out of this academy, whether they are willing or not, will all be regarded as your people. Tang 36 looked at him and said, the Tianhai clan and those two archbishops definitely have many tricks up their sleeves. They might even want to use the matter of challenging the Orthodox Academy to directly challenge His Holiness the Pope. But now that we are directly pressuring them in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate, all the pressure will inevitably be borne by the Orthodox Academy alone. You must get used to this because in the next few decades, you might face these problems at any time. Only after hearing these words did Chun Changsheng realize how complicated this matter was. Ashamed, he said, I really don't understand these things. In other words, it's fortunate that I didn't go to the Li Palace. Even if you go to the Li Palace and ask His Holiness for help, if his venerable self is sure that the Orthodox Academy can still hold on, he won't say anything. Tang 36 looked into his eyes and said, because His Holiness thinks the same as us. We hope that you can get used to this pressure as quickly as possible and then mature as quickly as possible. These things are too complicated. Chun Changsheng sincerely said, no matter how I think about it, I would never have thought of these things. How did you all manage to understand them? Peeling silk from cocoons and guessing at the hearts of people. These are the things that Demon Military Advisor Blackrobe and Zhou Tong were most skilled at. Chun Changsheng had always felt that this was the most difficult thing in the world, countless times more difficult than the intellectual sword. Tang 36 just happened to recall the sword that Su Li had taught Chun Changsheng and said, you can even learn the intellectual sword, so how can you not understand these things? It's just that you're too lazy to think about them. Chun Changsheng shook his head. I'm not trying to console you. Tang 36 looked at him and said, that day, you said that I was very similar to Su Li. In truth, later on, I also thought that you were very similar to someone. Wang Pe. Chen Changsheng expectantly looked at him. That frowning fellow. Just how is he similar to you? Tang 36 said, I'm talking about His Holiness the Pope. Chen Changsheng was a little startled by these words. He couldn't understand just how he was similar to the Pope. When I was little, my grandfather told me that back then, the Orthodoxy only had two successors, the Pope and your master. Whether in terms of cultivation talent or intelligence, the Pope could not compare to your master. Later on, the two of them went to study at the Heavenly Tao Academy and the Orthodox Academy, and the gap between them grew larger and larger. But after not even 10 years, His Holiness the Pope caught up. Because he was not as sociable as your master and had a close relationship with the imperial court, he only studied at the Heavenly Tao Academy and had no distracting thoughts, so his cultivation advanced very quickly. Tang 36 said, I said that you and His Holiness the Pope were very similar precisely because the two of you are extremely focused and treasure time. Chen Changxing thought about it and said, that does seem to be the case. Because of that shadow, he always lived very seriously, focused on Xiao Xing and treasured time. But he didn't expect that His Holiness the Pope was also this kind of person. Tang 36 looked at him and said, actually, I always wanted to know why you treasure time so much. In other words, you are always so anxious. What are you anxious about? What do you want to do? Chen Changsheng was silent and didn't say anything. It's fine if you don't want to say it. If you say it, it will probably sound crazy again. Just like when you said you wanted to get first place on the first banner in the Great Trial. You want to become the second Zhou Dufu? Tang 36 didn't wait for him to answer. He looked at him and smiled. No matter what it is, it must be very interesting. In the future, I will watch you do it. Chen Changxing thought about it and still didn't say thank you. He asked back, what about you? What do you want to do? Why have you become so serious recently? Why do you want to help me? Most of the time, the question, why do you want to help me, could easily make the atmosphere turn bad. But he and Tang 36 were already very close. He didn't care, and Tang 36 was the same. Before I came to the capital, I never thought about what I wanted to do in the future. Tang 36 walked under the big banyan tree and looked at the dots of starlight on the lake. He paused for a while and said, or in other words, what I want to do in the future has already been decided, so I don't need to think about it. Chen Changsheng stood next to him and glanced at him. He found that his expression was extremely calm, which was very rare. When the proclamation of Azure Cloud was updated, do you still remember Elder Tianji's comment? He said that I was lazy, otherwise I would have entered the top 10 of the proclamation of Azure Cloud. Yes, I remember it very clearly. That's why when I saw your appearance outside the Mausoleum of Books that day, I really didn't expect it. Lazy means I don't want to do anything, because ever since I was young, I really didn't need to do anything. The night wind gradually died down, and the surface of the lake gradually became flat. The starlight that fell on the water also gradually became clearer. Tang 36 looked in that direction and said, no matter who becomes the emperor or who becomes the pope, as long as humans are not enslaved by the demons, my family can live very well. And I am destined to become the master of the Tang family. I don't need to do anything, and I can live a life of wealth and power. I will live in the most luxurious manner in the world. I will marry the most virtuous and quiet wife. I will drink the most expensive wine, ride the fiercest horses, organize the best theatrical troops, and the people who come and go are the most powerful people in the world. Since all of this has already been decided, why should I still work hard? Chen Changxing thought about it and asked, then, what about cultivation? Tang 36 said, Elder Tianji said that if I work hard, I can enter the top 10 of the proclamation of Azure Cloud, but that's still not as good as Su Yu Rong, Shishio, and you. Chen Changxing remembered. Other than in the Plum Garden Inn, he had also mentioned this matter. At that time, the words Tang 36 used were, that woman who makes people speechless, and that wolf cub. He looked at Tang 36 and explained, being able to enter the top 10 of the proclamation of Azure Cloud is already very good. Indeed, it is good, but it's still not as good as you freaks. Even if it's just a little bit, it's still not enough. Tang 36 paused and said, if I can't do my best, Then what's the point? Chun Changsheng didn't know how to respond and asked, Then why aren't you lazy now? Tang 36 said, Elder Tianji said in the proclamation of Azure Cloud that it's because I'm met with fortune. What fortune? How come I don't know about it? Idiot, doesn't this mean that I met you? What about me? Qin Changxing really didn't think that there was anything special about himself. But just like what Tang 36 said a few days ago, being a genius, but not knowing it was really something that made people in the same field angry and depressed. He looked at Qin Changsheng and shook his head. I have never seen someone like you. People like you are probably even rarer than pure white unicorns in the world. Because you live too seriously, too righteously. Although I still don't know what you are pursuing, that feeling is very interesting. Chapter 489. After coming to the capital from Xining village, the most important thing Chun Changsheng experienced was not going to the divine general of the East Mansion to break off the engagement, nor was it meeting the distressed Luo in the Tradition Academy, nor was it even meeting the Black Dragon in the depths of the Tong Palace. Although these two encounters had changed his fate to some extent, the one that truly affected his life was the meal in the Plum Garden Inn. When he met Tang 36, he realized that the young should be frivolous and not be like him and Senior Yurin. They were clearly still very young, but lived like elders who had attained the Tao for many years. Only then did he realize that there were some things in the world that should be fought for, and those that should be given up should be given up. In other words, he learned from Tang 36 how to live a more relaxed life. Correspondingly, from when Shui to the capital, the most important thing for Tang 36 was meeting Chun Changsheng. He learned many things from Chun Changsheng. Their temperaments were congenial, but it was not to say that they were completely the same. In fact, they were the exact opposite. One was active, while the other was calm. One was like water, while the other was like fire. When they worked together, they truly displayed strength that far exceeded their age. More importantly, if Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 didn't meet, then the Ivy Festival might not have developed like that. The ending of the Great Trial might have changed greatly. The Tradition Academy definitely wouldn't have reopened its doors and recruited new students. Qin Changsheng couldn't handle the pressure from the family of Tian Hai and the new faction of the tradition. Then the whole story would have gone in a completely different direction. It could even be said that history would have changed. From this point of view, the meeting in the Heavenly Academy between Chun Changsheng, who was still a little Taoist from the countryside, and Tang 36, who just came to the capital, was extremely important. Maybe you did it on purpose. Maybe you did it on purpose. Anyways, it wasn't on purpose. Tang 36 looked at his eyes and continued. You never thought that I am the same as Princess Luo. I also carry a heavy responsibility. Chun Changsheng thought that Luo shouldered the heavy responsibility of the Yao race and shouldn't bear the pressure of the conflict between the two forces of the human world. Therefore, he didn't let her return to the Tradition Academy and even intentionally reduced the number of times he met her. But he didn't think that Tang 36 was the successor of the family of Wen Shui. He did so many things in the capital. In the eyes of some people, it was probably the intention of the old master of the Tang family. Hearing Tang 36 words, he finally understood. He felt apologetic and wanted to say something. Tang 36 raised his right hand and gestured for him to stop talking nonsense. But it doesn't matter because I'm not an adult yet, so I don't have to worry about these things for now. You just asked me what I want to do and why I want to help you. You're wrong. I'm not helping you. I'm helping myself because I'm also a student of the Tradition Academy. This place doesn't belong to you, Qin Changsheng. What do I want to do? Before I return to Wen Shui to inherit the clan, I don't want to think about the livelihood of hundreds of thousands of people. Don't want to think about the continuation of the clan for 1,000 generations. I don't want to write about those heavy problems. I just want to play to my heart's content for myself, for us. Tang 36 looked at Chun Changsheng and said, A few days ago, I told you here that young people should live like young people, laugh when they should scold when they should, and why didn't Xian Yuan smash the tree today? Are the pastries of Clear Lake Restaurant that delicious? Anyways, when you become the strongest person in the world in the future, when people mention me, besides my identity as the head of the Tang family, they will also mention that several hundred years ago, you and I made the Tradition Academy stand up again in the capital. Then I will feel very happy." He was fated to be the head of the One Shui Tang family, the richest person on the continent. This didn't need to struggle, didn't need to work hard. Therefore, he cared more about the future of the Tradition Academy, because it wasn't the legacy of his ancestors, but the career they had built with their own two hands. All young people like to talk about struggle, but not all young people understood this principle. "I will work hard." Chen Chongsheng thought about it, then said, "Because of certain reasons, I will work hard to become the strongest person in the world, so this is something that I can do in passing." Tang 36 said, "You use the word in passing very well. I really admire it. It seems indifferent and especially uncaring. In the future, when you truly become the strongest person in the world, don't forget this word." Chen Chongsheng said, "I will remember." Tang 36 extended his hand and said, "Deal." Chen Chongsheng had never made this sort of bow before. He somewhat clumsily imitated Tang 36 and extended his hand. Tang 36 very casually shook his hand and then let go. "Let's go." The Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education just sent a message saying that the Heavenly Academy has guests. "We have to prepare. You're the principal, so this sort of thing is naturally for you to do. I can't be bothered with it. Let me stay a little longer." Tang 36 walked to the great banyan tree by the lake and said, "In the past, you and Princess Luluo always dominated this tree. Now it's time for me to enjoy it." Chen Chongsheng said nothing more and turned to leave. After a while, he heard a voice from the great banyan tree. Turning his head, he saw that Tang 36 was already standing on the tree's arm. The starlight spilling down from the night sky enveloped the great banyan tree, plating his clothes with a faint layer of starlight. From a distance, he seemed like a very beautiful little silver man. The plans of the Tianhai clan and the Orthodoxy's new faction had encountered a completely unexpected setback. No one could understand whether this was a plot or a farce. While Chen Chongsheng and Tang 36 seemed to be fooling around, but were actually rather tenacious in their resistance. This offensive that had begun with the all-school martial exhibition had not even had the time to turn into a tempest before it was forced to a temporary halt. After Su Mo, you had taught a lesson to that servant from the B clan called Yi Xingqing. Bi Tianxin probably knew that this was a warning from his father. Even after the match ended, he did not appear again. The Orthodox Academy welcomed a temporary peace, and then it quickly welcomed its first group of guests. In the early morning, the weather was still not too hot. The main gate of the Orthodox Academy was completely open, and the priests of the Li Palace were waiting outside. The new students that had just finished their breakfast or had already begun their morning studies curiously looked over. A piece of news was beginning to spread. The faces of the students revealed excited and nervous expressions as they walked to the gate and curiously peered out. In a short while, 2 carriages stopped in front of the gate. The soldiers of the Imperial Guard that had opened the path took over with the Orthodoxy cavalry. Palace maids walked up to the 2 carriages and respectfully helped the people in the carriages down. The visitors to the Orthodox Academy were MOU and an old man. "The weekend is too relaxing. Today, I'm planning on resting, the first day of this month. Of course, resting means that I won't be writing today, but that doesn't mean that I won't be updating." This is updating. There's still one more chapter in the evening. Now that I have a draft, my life has truly become completely different. I wish everyone a pleasant weekend like mine. Chapter 490. Seeing that it really was Lady MOU. The freshmen of the Tradition Academy were extremely nervous and excited. Those standing at the back kept tiptoeing, trying to get a better look at this legendary figure. As for the youngsters standing at the front of the crowd, they were so shocked by her beauty that they didn't dare to raise their heads, only daring to stare at the tips of their feet. The students knew that the Pope and the Divine Queen were no longer as close as they were in the past. The Tradition Academy was the front line between the two powers, but they still couldn't suppress their excitement. It must be known that MOU was the most famous beauty of the Zhou dynasty, as well as the most famous talented woman. She was also an extremely powerful and important person. Even the princess of Ping State could not compare to her in the hearts of the people. Only Su Yu Rong, who had gone to the Holy Maiden Peak many years ago to cultivate, could be compared to her. As for the old man who came with Mou to the Tradition Academy, he had the emblem of the Pavilion of Divine Ordnance on his clothes. He should be someone in charge of the Pavilion of Divine Ordnance. But why did the people from the Pavilion of Divine Ordnance come to the Tradition Academy? Why did Lady Mou come with them? The students couldn't find the answer to their questions because Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 quickly arrived at the field. Tang 36 had slept a bit late last night. He had thought that since the battle had finally come to an end, he could take advantage of the cool morning to have a good sleep. Who would have thought that he would have to wake up again? He was already in a bad mood, and when he saw the students looking at Mou with such infatuation, he felt very embarrassed. He said angrily, "What are you looking at? Have you never seen a beauty before?" Although a beauty could entertain the eyes, it couldn't replace the rules of the Tradition Academy. The rules of the Tradition Academy were Tang 36 words. The students were helpless. They shook their heads and left. But the speed at which they left was so slow that it made people's hair stand on end. Qin Changsheng knew that Mou's personality wasn't as calm as she appeared in front of him. Lady Mou, who could manage the state affairs for the Divine Queen, was known for her coldness and toughness. Hearing Tang 36 casual words, he was worried that Mou would be unhappy and use this as an excuse to attack him. He turned around and saw that Mou didn't mind at all and smiled. "I thought you would be angry." He glanced at the old man from the Pavilion of Divine Ordnance and whispered to Mou. Mou rolled her eyes at him and said, "What's there to be angry about? You don't usually call me that." Her voice was also very soft, so she believed that neither Tang 36 nor the old man from the Pavilion of Divination could hear their conversation. Since they were here to inspect the Tradition Academy on behalf of the government, then they had to inspect it. Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 accompanied her to walk around the academy and talk casually. "Does your sister still like tinfoil puzzles?" Mou looked at Tang 36 and asked. Tang 36 said, "When I left last year, she didn't play anymore. Now she likes to build wooden houses, the kind that's this big." He gestured with his hands and said, "The house didn't look very big, but if you wanted it to be stable, you had to get a special table. In the end, in order to put that table, the family had to build a building just for her." Mou smiled and said, "This is also your home." Tang 36 said, "If my house was half as big as the royal palace, it wouldn't be so troublesome." Mou smiled and said, "It's not like I haven't been to Wenshui before. If your family's ancestral home and those manors by the stream were put together, it would be half as big as the royal palace. Even the royal palace wouldn't be that big." Chun Changsheng didn't hear any hidden meaning in this conversation. He was currently in shock. Back at the Ivy League gathering, he didn't see Mou and Tang 36 interact. Only today did he know that they were old friends. As the saying goes, power and nobility are truly difficult to separate. "I've known his second sister since we were children." Mou guessed at what he was thinking and smiled. "But the last time I went with the Empress to Wenshui, he was only 3 years old. He was like a mud monkey. Who could have thought that he'd become so successful now?" Even Chun Changsheng, who was rather slow in this aspect, could hear the meaning behind it. Tang 36 naturally heard it even more clearly, but he had to pretend that he didn't understand. Mou was not a second generation like Bi Tianxin. She was Grand Lady Mo, and the Divine Empress behind her was even more terrifying than Bi Yanghong and Wuqiong by combined. A scion of a noble clan like Tang 36 naturally knew when to be arrogant and when to be low-key. Qin Changsheng was somewhat unaccustomed to his behavior because he still had no idea what Mou's status in the Great Zhou dynasty was. Of course, this couldn't be blamed on him. It could only be said that Mou's behavior in front of him was far too unlike Mou's. They arrived at the lakeside of the Separate Garden. It was very quiet and secluded, and the walls blocked off the scorching gazes of those distant young students. Mou formally introduced, "This is the head manager of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets." Chun Changsheng and Tang 36 bowed to this head manager as juniors. One was the successor to the orthodoxy, while the other was the successor to the Wenshui Tangs, but they were still young. Crucially, this was the head manager of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, not some ordinary head manager. They did not dare to look down on the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, and Chun Chong Sheng and Tang 36 had an extremely good impression of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets and the Elder of Heavenly Secrets. They had not forgotten the evaluation and expectations the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had for the Orthodox Academy when the Proclamation of Azure Sky was updated. The head manager did not dare to be negligent and solemnly returned the bow. He then looked at third young Master Tang and smiled. Recently, I have enjoyed working with young Master Tang. I hope we can continue working together in the future. This was obviously referring to the business of the Ivy League challenging the Orthodox Academy and the two sides working together to win money. Tang 36 modestly said, "Not at all. It was mainly because of Chun Chong Sheng's good cooperation." The head manager laughed loudly and looked at Chun Chong Sheng. Principal Chin's four-sword moves have been enthusiastically discussed by the Pavilion's guardians for many days. They all say that your sword cultivation is truly unfathomable. Chin Chong Sheng was not a businessman after all. He was not as thick-skinned as Tang 36 and this head manager, so he felt a little awkward after hearing this. Mou glanced at him and did not say anything, but he felt that her gaze carried a very strong sense of ridicule. The reason for this head manager's visit was already very clear yesterday when the education board sent a message to the palace. Xian Yuan Pa had already let the students leave the library and empty the place. Chun Chong Sheng untied the short sword and handed it to the head manager with both hands. After the head manager took the sword, he was not in a hurry to unsheath it. His gaze rested on the sheath and did not move away for a very long time. Chin Chong Sheng instantly became nervous. Although his master and the Pope had both said that no one could forcefully open the sheath, when he thought of the several thousand famous swords in the sheath, the wealth that had always been hidden, that not even Tang 36 had mentioned, and even more importantly, the image of the black monolith, he could not help but be nervous. Chapter 491. After an unknown amount of time had passed, in Chun Chong Sheng's opinion, it had been a very, very long time. The head manager of the Pavilion of Divine Ordnance finally shifted his gaze away from the scabbard and smiled at him. Chun Chong Sheng didn't know if there was any deeper meaning to this, but he could only hope that there wasn't. The head manager's hand lightly caressed the sheath and sighed ruefully, "A good item." Tang 36 naturally knew that this sheath was a good item. Any spatial artifact could become the cornerstone treasure of an ordinary sect. Chun Chongqing's sheath had once poured out a mountain of swords in the library, and it might not have been all that was inside. From this, one could imagine how enormous the space inside was. On the continent, whether it was to appraise a cultivator or a magical artifact, the Pavilion of Divination was undoubtedly the best choice. Otherwise, those famous rankings would not have so much credibility. Tang 36 knew that this head manager had come to see the stainless sword, but he didn't want to miss the chance to evaluate the sheath. He probingly asked, "How good is it?" The head manager solemnly said, "Extremely good." Hearing this, Chin Chong Sheng almost laughed out loud. His nervousness was slightly relieved. Tang 36, on the other hand, was very depressed. He thought that the shamelessness of this head manager's words really could compete with his own. He angrily said, "Is it good enough to be recorded on the tier of legendary weapons?" He had originally said these words in a fit of pique, but unexpectedly, the head manager's face turned solemn upon hearing this. After seriously thinking it over, he shook his head. Tang 36 was somewhat proud, but also somewhat disappointed. But at this moment, the head manager added, "I remember that this sheath has always been on the tier of legendary weapons, so there's naturally no need to record it." The library became very quiet. Tang 36 glanced at Chun Chongsheng. Mou glanced at the sheath. Chun Chongsheng didn't know where he should look. "This is the vault sheath." The head manager's fingers lightly tapped the sheath. Hearing the heavy but not muffled sound of the sheath, he sighed ruefully. "It's also been 20-some years since I've seen it." Although Mou had some guesses about this, her expression still changed. She asked, "This is the vault sheath from the Lee Palace?" The head manager did not immediately answer, but solemnly unsheathed the dagger from the sheath. Looking at the dagger, he slowly said, "If it wasn't the vault sheath, how could it contain this peerlessly sharp sword?" Many times, one could hear the evaluation of peerlessly sharp, but if this evaluation came from the strict pavilion of divination, then it was extremely unusual. This meant that the sharpness of Chun Changxing's dagger was truly peerless. Solely in sharpness, the pavilion of divination did not believe that there was any divine weapon in the world that could surpass it. This short sword looked very ordinary. Chun Changxing had never carefully maintained it, to the point where he rarely even wiped it, but could be clearly seen that the blade of the short sword didn't have any dirt, not even a speck of dust. This sword had killed many people in Chun Changxing's hands and had been stained with blood, but no blood could be seen. The sword's name is stainless. "It really is stainless," the shopkeeper lamented. This dagger was too sharp, so its blade was incomparably smooth. This way, it could pass through thousands of flowers without being stained by their fragrance, enter the secular world without stirring up the mortal world, and break through all living things without disturbing them. This dagger was too sharp, so the blade was extremely smooth. It could pass through 10,000 flowers without touching it, enter the mortal world without disturbing it, break through all things without disturbing them. In order to make a sword so sharp, apart from an extremely high level of forging, the most important factor was the material of the sword itself. To make a dagger so sharp, apart from extremely high forging skills, the most important factor was the material of the dagger itself. Chun Changxing shook his head. He really didn't know what material this short sword was made of. Then he, Mou, and Tang 36 all looked at the shopkeeper. Chun Changxing shook his head. He really did not know what material this dagger was made of. Then he, Mou, and Tang 36 all looked at the head manager. The head manager shook his head and said in a slightly cold voice, "This matter cannot be spoken of. Otherwise, thunder will strike from the 9 heavens, and the life of the person who speaks the truth and the sword wielder will be in great danger." After viewing the sword, the head shopkeeper first left the Orthodox Academy, saying that he had to make preparations for the tier of legendary weapons to be changed again after so many years. Mou did not leave. She looked at Chun Changxing and said, "The vault sheath is a treasure of the Lee Palace. It was stolen by your master. It doesn't seem appropriate for you to keep it with you." Chun Changxing thought, before today, only the Pope had seen the origin of the sheath. As long as you don't tell everyone, what's wrong with it? First of all, my master was once the principal of the Tradition Academy, the senior of the Pope, and a legitimate successor of the Orthodoxy. Even if it's a division of the family property, he has the right to take something from the Lee Palace. He continued, "Secondly, if you think it's inappropriate, I can go to the Lee Palace today and return it to the Pope, and then ask him to return it to me. But don't you think it's unnecessary?" Mou looked at him like he was a stranger. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Today, your words are sharper than your sword. This is not like you." Chun Changxing said, "Maybe it's because I've been sharpening swords a lot lately." And Mou knew that he was speaking of the matters that had taken place in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate. After looking at him for a while, she said, "Correct, you truly are much stronger than you were a few days ago. Continuously battling against experts at the initial stage of star condensation, and then instructing the freshmen to battle against opponents whose strength far surpassed theirs." Chun Changxing's words were not wrong. This process was rather arduous. It was like using countless large rocks, small rocks, round rocks, and square rocks to sharpen one sword. As long as the sword was not broken, it would inevitably become sharper and sharper. From the mausoleum of books to the Garden of Zhou, from Xuanyang City to the capital, all the good fortune and comprehensions he had encountered in this period of time had been incessantly hammered and burned. All the impurities had been squeezed out or burned into smoke and disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the essence. In the end, it had completely become his own strength and cultivation, never to be lost again. The current Chun Changxing had truly gotten much stronger. If he were to fight with Divine General Shui, he and Liang Hongzhuang, he would probably have a chance at victory. But none of this has any meaning. Mou calmly smiled at him. Because she's about to return. Everyone is telling me that she's about to return. Chen Changsheng very seriously said. But in truth, I also believe that this doesn't have any meaning. Mou said. You are the future pope, and she will become the holy maiden. If you lose to her, what sort of voices do you think will be heard within the orthodoxy? This matter involved the conflict between the north and south of the orthodoxy that had lasted for 1,000 years. Although Su Yurong had been born in the capital, and the conflict between the two sides had not been as intense as it had been in the past, Chen Changxing knew that Mou was not exaggerating. After a long period of silence, he asked with complex emotions, "Must we fight?" But all of this was useless. Just now, when he was writing those two meaningless sentences, he had almost written them like this. Chapter 492. Mou looked at him and said carelessly, "In the end, it's up to you to decide. In my opinion, it's best if you win her. I don't like her anyway." Chen Changsheng didn't understand and asked, "I remember you said you were good friends with her. It's easy for friends to dislike each other." Mou turned around and walked out of the library. When Chen Changsheng and Mou were talking, Tang 36 kept silent until her figure disappeared outside of the library. Then he walked in front of Chen Changsheng and stared at his eyes without saying a word. "You look scary like this," Chen Changsheng said. Tang 36 stared at his eyes and said, "They say the eyes are the window to the soul. I really want to see how many things you are hiding from us." "What am I hiding from you? How come I don't know? When did you become so close with Lady Mou?" Chen Changsheng didn't know how to explain. They belonged to different factions, but they had contact in private. But this was a small matter. The key was that he really couldn't tell Mou why he knew her. No matter how powerful Mou was, she was still a beautiful girl. Her reputation was important. He couldn't tell the world that Lady Mou, who was like a goddess in everyone's eyes, would climb into his bed and sleep whenever she had nothing to do. "Chen Changsheng, you're good." Tang 36 sighed. "The scabbard is the divine weapon of Li Palace. The sword is also going to be a famous weapon on the tier of legendary weapons. Your fiancé is Su Yurong, your female student is Luo, and now you're having an affair with Lady Mou, who all the men in Zhou Dynasty like." Chen Changsheng said seriously, "You have to make it clear. I haven't even touched her hand." Tang 36's expression clearly didn't believe him, but then he became serious. He looked at him and said seriously, "Stay away from her." Chen Changsheng understood his meaning and nodded. Tang 36 said, "Remember my words. This woman isn't simple and she's cold. Even if you want to do business, don't choose her." Chen Changsheng thought of Mou who imprisoned him in Tong Palace and nodded again. Then he thought of the black dragon deep in Tong Palace. He realized that because he was too busy recently, he didn't go to New North Bridge. "I have something to do tonight," he said to Tang 36. Tang 36 looked at him and sneered. "See, this is another secret." Chen Changsheng smiled and didn't say anything. Tang 36 walked out of the library side by side with him and suddenly said, "I won't blame you for that anymore." Chen Changsheng was confused. He looked at him and asked, "What is it?" "Last year at the inn, I wanted to take your sword, but you didn't let me. I've always been very unhappy about that. Now that I think about it, when we first met, it was reasonable for you to be cautious." The manager of the Pavilion of Divine Ordnance had just confirmed the value of Chen Changsheng's sword. Tang 36 asked himself, if he was in Chen Changsheng's shoes, he would also view this sword as a treasure and not easily look at others. Chen Changsheng was startled for a moment before remembering this old matter. He shook his head and said, "You're too vengeful." Tang 36's sword-like eyebrows twitched. "You know that the demons can see fewer stars than us, right?" This was something recorded in the Book of Tao. Not long ago, Chen Changsheng had just returned from the snowy plains of the demon domain. Of course, he was very clear about it. He nodded. "At night, our sky is filled with stars, but their side is different. Some places are densely packed with stars, and some places are very sparse. Stars that are close to each other can form a picture. I know. Nank's Southern Cross Ord was created from the two star rivers in their night sky. The Star River is very wide. What we're going to talk about is the matter in the middle of the Star River. What matter? The demons will combine the different shapes of the stars into constellations. Beings born on different days belong to different constellations and have their own characteristics. And then, if I'm on the side of the demons, according to my date of birth, I should be a Scorpio. Chen Chongsheng stopped. He remembered that the scripture of Wei did have records about this, but he didn't understand why Tang 36 suddenly mentioned this matter. It should be known that the demons and humans had different cultural backgrounds. In their respective territories, the totems or things that the other side worshipped would become taboo. Right, that manager of the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance. He stopped in confusion because he realized that he had forgotten what the manager looked like. He had only been observing the sword for a few moments, and his memory had always been good. How could he forget the appearance of the person he had just met? Tang 36 did not hear him continue asking about the constellations. Just as he was feeling somewhat dissatisfied, he couldn't help but be startled by his words, because he realized that he had also forgotten what the manager looked like. Moreover, as his memories continued, the events that had occurred in that period of time became more and more insignificant. Not everything was fading, but the manager. He even had a feeling that he, Chen Chongsheng, and Mou had been the only people who had been observing the sword in the library. Chen Chongsheng and he glanced at each other, seeing the unease and fear in each other's eyes. Was the manager of the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance so formidable? Just who was this manager? Who was he? After the manager left the Orthodox Academy, he did not wait for Mou, but went straight to the Imperial Palace. The one to receive him at the palace gate was that elderly chief eunuch. The chief eunuch's face carried a faint arrogance. Whether it was the leader of the Imperial Guards or the other eunuchs who respectfully bowed, they would only use their noses to give a light hum. Naturally, they would not speak to the manager. No one noticed that in the quiet and secluded depths of the palace, the cold arrogance on the chief eunuch's face had completely disappeared. He whispered to the manager, his demeanor even seeming somewhat humble. On this continent, the number of people that had the qualifications to make this chief eunuch act so humble could not exceed 10. In the secular world, the manager of the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance was naturally an important figure, but he would definitely not be ranked among these 10. So the truth was very simple. This old man was not the manager of the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance, even though he truly did come from the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance. In a remote palace hall, the Divine Empress met with this old man. Even she displayed great respect for this old man, inviting him to sit first before sitting down herself. The identity of this old man was already on the verge of being revealed. This conversation very quickly concluded, because the Divine Empress and this old man from the Pavilion of Divine Ordinance had only exchanged 3 sentences. 2 of these sentences had been said by this old man. His surname is Chun. I can't tell how old he is. After hearing these 2 sentences, the Divine Empress fell silent for a very long time. Then she turned to the old man and calmly said, "You've worked hard. Mount Langya's scenery is not bad. In the future, if there's a chance, I will go as a guest." The old man nodded, rose, and left the imperial palace. At this time, the hot tea on the table had just been served, still steaming. The Divine Empress gazed at the white steam rising from the teacup, lost in thought. Mount Langya was a famed mountain by the Western Sea. It had a circumference of several hundred li, and its scenery was serene and beautiful. It was said that when the weather was at its best, one could faintly see the great western continent's white deer horn from its highest peak. This famed mountain had once belonged to the south and had also been occupied by the great western continent. In the last 200 years, it had become part of the Great Zhou, but it had not received the recognition of all the powers, so it was nominally ownerless. The Divine Empress had previously said that if there was a chance, she would go to Mount Langya as a guest. Her meaning was that from today onwards, the Great Zhou would no longer be the master of Mount Langya. Mount Langya had changed masters today. This famed mountain by the sea was the price she had paid to invite this old man to the capital. For this, the old man only needed a glance. Of course, he did not look at the sword, but at the person. Even if the stainless sword was a divine weapon and would enter the tier of legendary weapons, it was not worth Mount Langia. What was truly worth this price was Chun Changsheng. The divine empress looked at the gradually dissipating white steam and thought of the two sentences the old man had left behind. She said nothing. Chun Changsheng was obviously surnamed Chun. The old man had said that he was surnamed Chun, meaning that he was of the Chun imperial family. Many people knew that Chun Changsheng was 16 this year. The old man said that he could not see his age, which meant that he might not even be 16, or his real age might be even older. The divine empress stood up and walked out of the hall. Her sleeves fluttered, and the steam rising from the tea on the table instantly disappeared without a trace. The tea in the bowl had turned into ice. Walking out of the hall, she held her hands behind her back and looked at the small pond in front of her with some pride. But it was unknown what she had thought of. The water in the pond was very green and very quiet. As the night wind blew, fine lines appeared on the surface. She stood by the pond for a very long time, from early morning to dusk, and then night fell. The water in a certain part of the pond suddenly began to surge, as if something was about to emerge. Chapter 493. Nights at New North Bridge were similar to summer nights in other parts of the capital, filled with the stifling heat of summer. The grassy plains were filled with people incessantly waving their palm leaf fans. Many of them would have an ice pack in their other hand that wasn't holding onto the handle of their fan. Chun Changsheng waited for a very long time before finding a suitable opportunity to descend from the tree to the well's edge and jump in. It was still that familiar feeling of landing. It was still that bone-chilling cold. The scorching heat on the surface was nowhere to be found in this underground space. The thick layer of snow and frost on the ground indicated that this place would always be a cruel winter. Seeing the black dragon slowly float over like a mountain. Although he had seen this scene many times before, Chun Changsheng still found it hard to control his emotions, his heart trembling. The black dragon floated in the air in front of him. Looking down at him from above, the emotion in its eyes was very cold. Only he could clearly see that the deepest part of its eyes hid a hint of impatience and resentment. After returning to the capital from Sunyang City, he had come to see the Black Dragon once, but recently, due to the pressure on Orthodox Academy, he had been too busy and had no way of leaving. The wound on the Black Dragon's brow should have gradually healed. At least from the surface, it didn't seem to be a problem. Chun Changsheng took out the roasted chicken and lamb he had prepared as usual, then cleaned up the rubbish on the ground. Just as he was about to speak, a sudden gust of cold wind blew over. This was the Black Dragon's dragon breath. It contained a frightening might and cold. No matter how powerful one's divine soul was, it could be scattered by this cold dragon breath. The legendary golden dragon's dragon breath could directly melt metal. Chun Changsheng had never seen it, but at this moment he was very sure that the dragon breath of a black frost dragon of the same level could definitely freeze metal into fragments, because he was currently frozen, the cold piercing to the bone, incomparably painful. After a while, he struggled to break out of the ice, his fear still lingering. He said, "In the future, don't make this kind of joke." He didn't know that his body had once been soaked in the black dragon's true dragon blood. Otherwise, that dragon breath would have frozen him to death. That was no joke. The black dragon's huge eyes flashed with a hint of happiness. The underground space echoed with its squeaky laughter. Chun Changsheng was already used to the black dragon's strange laughter. He told it about the recent events of Orthodox Academy, and also explained why he hadn't come for a long time. The black dragon slowly landed on the ground in front of him, blocking the radiance of the thousands of night pearls in the dome. Chun Changsheng stood in the shadows and looked at it for a long time. He decided that he would get an answer today. Back then, he had risked his life for the first time in meditative introspection and was about to die. In the end, when he finally woke up, he was lying on the bed of the Orthodox Academy. Not only was he completely unharmed, he had even obtained an unimaginable strength and speed. He knew that this definitely had something to do with the black dragon. He had asked the black dragon several times, but the black dragon had never directly answered his question. Hearing his question, perhaps sensing his determination today, the black dragon did not humiliate him with disregard or dragon breath like it did in the past. Instead, it remained silent for a very long time. Are you sure you want to know the answer? The black dragon spoke in human language. This wasn't the first time Chun Changsheng had heard the black dragon speak with a human's voice. At the start, he didn't understand why the black dragon's voice sounded like that of a hot-tempered and easily angered little girl. Later on, he realized that although the black dragon had been imprisoned underground by Wang Jisoo for several hundred years, in comparison to the long lifespan of the dragon race, it was still in its puberty phase. It couldn't be considered a young dragon, but it could be considered a young female dragon. Chun Changsheng said, "I want to know the answer." The black dragon fell silent again for a very long time, then described what had happened back then. Only then did Chun Changsheng realize how lucky he had been. After a very long time, he looked at the black dragon and said, "How should I thank you, sir?" Ever since his journey to the Garden of Zhou, he very rarely addressed the black dragon respectfully. But at this moment, his mind was rather uneasy, filled with lingering fear and gratitude towards the black dragon. So he very respectfully used the word sir. However, the black dragon clearly did not want to hear this word. A hint of embarrassment appeared in the depths of its enormous eyes. Then, the black dragon seemed to think of something, and that hint of embarrassment turned into a hint of anger. If Chun Changsheng had been a little more sensitive in certain aspects, perhaps he would have seen a hint of embarrassment. All the meaning in the depths of the black dragon's eyes ultimately transformed into a fiendish intent. "You've obtained my first blood, and you're asking me how to thank you." The underground world instantly became incomparably cold. The layer of snow on the ground was jolted into the air, and snowflakes floated down from the sky. Everywhere was a dense white. A dragon's cry fell directly into Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness. It was her voice. This time, she used dragon language. Her voice was very soft, very clear. Her emotions were very cold, very intense. Chun Changsheng almost fainted from the shock. Thinking back to the dragon's cry he had just heard, he realized that it was the black dragon speaking to him. Dragon language was the world's most complex, but also the simplest language. A single dragon's cry with a single syllable, but within it were countless tones. It could mean one thing, or it could be a large essay. When Chun Changsheng was very young, he had come into contact with dragon language when he read the last scripture. After coming to the capital, he had also studied with the black dragon for a period of time, but at this moment, he didn't completely understand it. He could faintly understand some parts of the black dragon's cry. "Blood you, I promise oath, heartless shame, unworthy death, warehouse, water, fat time." What did this mean? He was somewhat at a loss, especially the word heartless that resounded in his mind. It made him wonder if he had really heard it, if he had really learned dragon language. "Just what do you want me to do?" He brushed off the snow on his body, walked up to the black dragon, and raised his head. The black dragon looked down at him, its emotionless eyes gradually revealing a tinge of sadness and grievance. Perhaps because it didn't want Chun Changsheng to see it, or perhaps because it was truly rather tired, it closed its eyes. The wind and snow in the underground space also ceased. Chun Changsheng looked at it and said, "Thank you." He spoke very sincerely, but the black dragon did not open its eyes. Just as he had said in the Garden of Zhou and in the snowy mountains, it felt that when he had said those two words, he had not meant them. In truth, Chun Changsheng had seen the sadness and grievance in the dragon's eyes before it closed. He did not associate it with himself. Instead, he thought that in the eyes of humans and demi-humans, the black dragon would probably be a little girl about the same age as Luoluo. A little girl had been deceived by a human expert and imprisoned underground for several hundred years. Of course, she had the right to feel wronged, to have a sad expression. Chun Changsheng thought he understood why the black dragon had been so angry. Yes, the black dragon had saved his life, and it could even be said that it had given him a better life, and It had been imprisoned underground all this time. He had once promised it that if it was possible, he would think of a way to rescue it. But what had he done in the past 6 months? Had he ever thought about this matter? He had just asked how he could thank it. He lowered his head and walked past the black dragon's side, into the darkness, and then gradually vanished. Chen Changsheng's heart was currently filled with guilt. The black dragon did not open its eyes, but it knew what he was doing, but it did not know what he was thinking. It was quiet, with only the fading sound of footsteps. The area around the black dragon's closed eyes trembled, ice and snow rustling down. It seemed to want to open its eyes, but it ultimately did not. She somewhat woodenly thought, humans really are all shameless and useless. When they encounter a problem they cannot resolve, a kindness they cannot bear, they will think of hiding, or even more disgustingly, turning against each other. In the end, you are still a human. Then, if you want to leave, then leave. I don't have a good appetite today. I don't want to eat people. But if the next time you come, you're still only willing to say thank you, but not willing to bring the food from the Orthodox Academy's dining hall for me to taste, I will definitely swallow you whole. Yes, when Chen Changsheng was recounting the recent events of the Orthodox Academy, he did not forget to mention that Tang 36 had turned Clear Lake Restaurant into the Orthodox Academy's dining hall. When she heard the words Blue Lobster, she remembered that when she was very young, she would follow her father to the journey to the west to play. On the journey under the sea, when she was bored, she would randomly pick up a few blue lobsters and chew them in her mouth as snacks. Later on, when she landed in the human world, she discovered that some humans in the South also liked to eat similar food. It seemed to be called beetle nuts. The black dragon suddenly came to her senses, thinking, have I been locked up for too long? How can I be so easily distracted? Just a moment ago, I was preparing to curse the heartless man, and now I'm thinking about snacks? Then she heard a knocking sound from very far behind her, so she slowly opened her eyes. She was a black frost dragon. The coldness in her eyes could make the entire world feel fear, but for some reason, there was now a tinge of warmth. The knocking sound came from very far away. This was because the black dragon's body was massive, her body like a mountain. At this moment, Chen Changsheng was in front of that incomparably massive stone wall, attempting to undo the chains binding the black dragon. Miraculously, these two chains were not very thick, at least when compared to the black dragon's body. Yet the black dragon had no ability to struggle free. Chen Changsheng had tried before, so he knew that even the stainless sword appraised by the pavilion of heavenly secrets to be incomparably sharp had not been able to sever these chains. This was because the edge of the stainless sword was simply incapable of truly touching the chains. The outer edge of the chains was wrapped in a layer of qi that could not be seen or touched, yet truly existed. At this moment, the knocking sound came from a wall. He was currently beating away the thick layer of ice where the chains were inserted into the wall. A chain and array that could imprison a black frost dragon was naturally not something the current him could break. However, it was said that the road of 10,000 li began with one's feet, so he had to take the first step. The first step was research. The more he researched, the more shocked he felt. Chapter 494. Chen Changsheng felt shaken to the core because he realized that he actually had no understanding of the chains or the array in the wall. He was well versed in the Taoist canon, and after coming to the capital, he had come into contact with quite a few senior experts. His knowledge had broadened. In the Garden of Zhou, he had chatted with Lady Chujian, and in the wilderness, he had conversed with Su Li. Those two geniuses had taught him many things. Yet he still had no way of seeing through this array, not even the slightest clue. He could only sense the unimaginably grand qi and terrifying killing intent concealed within. As he knocked off the layer of ice and focused his attention on the connection between the chains and the stone wall, the two deceased divine generals carved into the incomparably massive stone wall also seemed to be looking at him. After some time, Chen Changsheng raised his head and gazed up at the stone wall. Seeing those two legendary divine generals, his heart was shaken. The experts of that time had truly been too powerful. Now that he thought about it, The first time in 1,000 years that wildflowers had bloomed was inconceivable. He was extremely sure that whether it was Wang Jitze who had laid down this array, or these two divine generals who had only left a strand of spiritual sense on the stone wall to hold the chains and bind the azure dragon, they had all definitely stepped into the divine domain. Then, of the 24 meritorious subjects of the Lingyan Pavilion, how many were at the Saint Realm? In Taizong's era, was the human world actually this powerful? It was no wonder that they could utterly defeat the demons and ultimately drive them back to Xiulao City. And now, ever since Wang Po left Tianliang County several decades ago, many people believe that the human race had welcomed yet another age of blooming wildflowers. He was also one of them. Then, when would he and his peers of this generation be able to catch up to those people from back then? Rest. With your current level of cultivation, it's impossible for you to pull out those chains from the wall. The black dragon's voice echoed in the quiet underground space. She had spoken in human language, so it sounded like a young girl's voice. It was brimming with ridicule, but it also seemed rather satisfied. That's right, she was quite satisfied with Chun Changsheng's performance today. Compared to the two simple words of thank you just now, his attitude when studying the arrays and chains on the stone wall was very focused. This was what it meant to be diligent. A cold wind blew. The black dragon's mountainous body moved at high speed within the vast underground space. It was unknown how it did it, but in a short amount of time, its head had arrived in front of Chun Changsheng, looking down at him from above. It was very dignified, but at the same time, it was deliberately acting very cold. Chun Changsheng looked at the complicated patterns on the chains and shook his head. He raised his head to look at the black dragon and said, "Perhaps you need to give me more time." The black dragon said, "I told you just now that time is not important to me. What matters is the result." Chun Changsheng thought to himself, "When did you say that?" But after thinking about it, he understood that the black dragon was referring to that dragon's roar. The problem was he couldn't understand the meaning behind that dragon's roar. He looked up at the black dragon and asked, "What did you say to me just now? What do you want from me?" The black dragon replied, "When you understand those words, you will naturally have an answer." Chun Changsheng did not understand why the words of these powerful beings of the divine domain were always so cryptic and hard to understand. The Pope was like this, Zhu Luo was like this, and now that he thought about it, only Su Li seemed more like a normal person, even though he himself was clearly not normal. He could see that the black dragon had already made up its mind. No matter how he asked, it would not speak. Just like in the past, it had never been willing to tell him what had happened on the night of the first illumination. Only today, for some reason, did it suddenly want to speak, so it spoke. Then regarding that dragon's roar, perhaps in the future, when it wanted to speak, it would naturally speak. It was just that he was still somewhat curious. Only now did Chun Changsheng realize just how important it was to have a good grasp of a language. In the eyes of outsiders, and in the records of the court, this was a palace that had already been abandoned. However, only the eunuchs and maids at the divine empress's side knew that the empress would occasionally come to this palace to sit and stroll around, but no one understood why. Especially after a certain day last summer. The empress had come here even more often, but the number of people who could remain in this palace grew fewer and fewer. Today, she was the only person in this palace. The divine empress stood by the water bank outside the palace, gazing at the small pond before her for a very long time. From morning to dusk, and then to night, she ruled over this vast country, the nominal master of the entire human world. Every day, she had to deal with countless matters of state, so time was incomparably precious. Yet she had spent an entire day looking at this small pond. At the very beginning, it was because after she finished speaking with that old man, her mind felt slightly uneasy. To her, this was an extremely rare occurrence, so she wanted to calm down by the uninhabited water bank. Afterwards, it was because she recalled the many things that had happened by this small pond, the youth she had encountered. Afterwards, it was because she had discovered that the youth really had come. At that moment, she raised her head and glanced at the vast sky of stars that had just appeared in the night sky. The corners of her lips perked up, carrying a hint of ridicule as she thought, "This thing called fate is truly interesting." She had once changed her own fate. She was the person in the world least afraid of facing fate, so she did not leave, but waited for fate to arrive. In the darkness, the dark green water of the pond suddenly began to move, especially the water in the very center. It was constantly roiling as if it was boiling. She calmly gazed at that place, allowing the night wind to caress her face. In the era of Taizong, she was already a world-renowned beauty. Not even Zhou Yuan able to steal away her brilliance. As she became empress, in the eyes of many, she became the world's #1 beauty. When she began to read through memorials for Emperor Xian, deal with the affairs of the state, and was bestowed the title of divine sage, no one dared to use the word beauty to describe her. Power would always be above beauty, but this did not change the fact that she truly was very beautiful. No traces of age could be seen on her face. The so-called serenity, steadiness, and maturity were simply a matter of temperament. There was nothing to nitpick about her appearance. She was extremely beautiful, but perhaps because she had ruled over this world for too long, there was a faint divine might and an extremely faint fiendish intent on her face. At this moment, the night wind lightly caressed her face. The beauty and majesty were all washed away, making her appear extremely ordinary. The fiendish intent was still there, but it had mostly disappeared into the depths of her eyebrows. The sound of the water in the pond continued, and the night wind did not stop either. It continued to linger around her body. The holy robe that represented her identity and status had become an ordinary cloth dress. As the night wind caressed her, she had become an ordinary woman, only that ebony hairpin was still in her hair. The waves surged, and Chen Chongsheng emerged from the water. He swam to the edge of the pond and climbed up. He walked into the thicket and prepared to take out a spare set of clean clothes to change his wet clothes. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. He turned around and looked across the pond. He saw her. Chapter 495. Under the night sky, the palace was very quiet. The pond and the garden were also very quiet, even though it was a summer night. There weren't only 2 people by the pond, there was also the black goat. It was in the nearby thicket. Chen Chongsheng first saw the middle-aged woman, then he saw the black goat. If it was anyone else, they would definitely jump in fright, but he didn't because he was already used to seeing the black goat by the pond every time he came out from under New North Bridge. As for the middle-aged woman, he wasn't unfamiliar with her. When he first came out from the pond, he saw her. Deep in the Forbidden Palace, if he alarmed the people of the palace, there would be great trouble. So he couldn't speak. He clasped his hands and bowed to the middle-aged woman across the pond. His actions were very polite, his movements were also very standard, but he was currently soaked. If he still bowed in such a respectful manner, it would inevitably be somewhat comical. The black goat looked at him through the leaves, slightly tilting its head, as if it was making fun of him. He couldn't care less. He gestured to the middle-aged woman, saying that he wanted to change into a set of dry clothes. Please turn around and wait a moment. Then he mouthed to the black goat, close your eyes. He had always thought that the middle-aged woman was deaf and mute, so she could naturally understand the sign language he learned from Senior Yuan. In reality, she really did no sign language. But she didn't turn around because there was nothing in this world that could make her turn around and avoid it. The black goat also didn't close its eyes. On the contrary, it opened them a little wider, making them look very bright in the night. Chen Chongsheng didn't know what to do. His entire body was soaked, constantly dripping water, looking very pitiful. The middle-aged woman seemed to be somewhat displeased with his reaction, waving her sleeve. The night wind blew from the other side of the pond and lingered around him. The summer night wind wasn't dry, but rather hot. After a moment, his clothes were dry, from the inside out becoming incomparably dry. Chen Chongsheng was very surprised. Then he saw the middle-aged woman walk out of the garden with her hands behind her back. The black goat glanced at him, turned around, walked out of the thicket, and followed the middle-aged woman. In the past, when returning from the Imperial Palace to the Orthodox Academy, it was always the black goat leading the way. Even after he obtained the key, habit was always incomparably strong. Thus, he followed the black goat, followed the middle-aged woman into the darkness of the imperial palace, then passed through that secluded secret door, arriving at the 100 Garden. Currently, Luo Luo lived in the Li Palace for a month, lived in the Imperial Palace for a month, and lived in the Imperial Palace for a month. Other than coming to steal herbs with Tang 36, Chen Chong Sheng hadn't been here for a long. However, the 100 Garden had not changed much from before. The corridors were still very winding, and the trees and flowers grew very well. They covered half of the path, and the table in the forest was still in its original place. There was still a teapot and 2 teacups on the stone table, but the tea they were drinking today was white tea. The tea was very clear, but the taste was very fragrant. There were many things he couldn't understand. For example, there was no one in the 100 Garden, so why was there a teapot and tea bowls on the stone table? Why was the tea in the teapot freshly brewed and the temperature was just right, neither hot nor cold? For example, according to MOU, this black goat was raised in the Imperial Palace, so why was it so close to this middle-aged woman? For example, why did this woman just wave her sleeve and the wind blew her hair and clothes dry? For example, this middle-aged woman. Who was she? This middle-aged woman's power level was unfathomable. At least he couldn't see it. She had a high position in the Imperial Palace, moved freely, knew many secrets of the Imperial Palace, and had a special feeling towards the 100 Garden. Chen Chongsheng already knew that this middle-aged woman wasn't simple. He had guessed her identity many times. From the fact that she was once a favored concubine in the imperial harem to the Taoist nun who meditated with the divine queen in the 100 Garden, he always felt that these guesses were wrong. Chen Chongsheng didn't guess anymore. The middle-aged woman didn't ask him to do anything, and she even helped him. Just like what Tang 36 said, because of himself, he didn't care too much about many things. He would always show a calmness that surpassed his age, and because he had a lot of secrets, he didn't want to know other people's secrets. More importantly, he was very used to and even enjoyed the atmosphere of drinking tea with this middle-aged woman in the 100 Garden, even though it was only 3 times. When drinking tea in the 100 Garden, the middle-aged woman didn't speak, so he didn't need to speak. Most of the time, the middle-aged woman was looking at the stars in the night sky or the marks of the old year in the 100 Garden. She didn't look at him, so he didn't need to be nervous. This kind of tranquil feeling seemed to be able to bring him back to the old temple in Xining village. It was as if he was still sitting next to the stream with Senior Yurun. They didn't need to say anything, and they didn't need to know each other's thoughts. They could just sit there and stare blankly. Because of the Garden of Zhou, Chen Chongsheng's state of mind was a little uneasy. He couldn't enter the Garden of Zhou, so he couldn't confirm the whereabouts of that girl. This made him very anxious, and he really needed the current tranquility. But different from the previous times, this tranquil feeling that he longed for and cherished was broken in the next moment. The middle-aged woman withdrew her gaze from the starry sky and began to look at him. She looked at him for a very long time. She looked very carefully, very calmly, and very attentively. It was as if there were mountains, rivers, flowers, trees, clouds, and infinite scenery on his face. Chen Chongsheng didn't know why she was looking at him like this. He was a little confused, so naturally he was a little nervous. As time passed, the middle-aged woman continued to look at him, so he became more and more nervous, to the point where his body finally became stiff. At this moment, the middle-aged woman suddenly extended her hand and used the upper edge of her forefinger to lift his chin. Chen Chongsheng was shocked. When they had first drunk tea here, this middle-aged woman had stroked his cheek. At the time, because of emotion in her eyes, Chen Chongsheng had endured it and did nothing. But stroking the cheek and pinching the chin were 2 completely different actions. The former could be understood as a senior's tender affection for a junior, of a reminiscence of a lost emotion, while the latter was more like teasing a small animal or teasing. Moreover, although the woman was old enough to be his mother, in the end, there was still a difference between men and women. This action was truly unacceptable to him. He wanted to turn his head and avoid it, but he discovered that an incomprehensible chi was coming from the woman's finger, directly immobilizing his body. She lifted his chin and carefully examined his face. Of course, she was not teasing a young boy, nor was she teasing a small animal, because her eyes did not contain any tender affection or reminiscence. There was no emotion at all. She looked at Chun Changsheng's face as if she was looking at a painting. She wanted to see what kind of secret was hidden behind the painting. Chun Changsheng really didn't like her current gaze, because it was too indifferent. However, he couldn't move at all. His nose slightly moved up and down, and the breath he exhaled became much heavier. If it was Luo or Tang 36 seeing the scene, they would know that he was really angry. But she didn't know, and even if she knew, it wouldn't affect her decision. No one or anything could change her decision. However, she probably felt that Chun Changsheng was very cute like this. She smiled and prepared to let go of his chin. But at this moment, her smile suddenly disappeared. Her face became stern, as if she saw something on his face. Chapter 496. A strand of killing intent faintly emerged from the center of her brow. In the silent 100-herb garden, an incomparably terrifying pressure appeared. Chun Changsheng stared blankly at her face, feeling the strand of killing intent and the ocean-like pressure around him. He subconsciously stopped struggling, vaguely guessing that something must have happened. She looked into his eyes. Was the problem in his eyes? No, the eyes were the windows to the soul. Through his eyes, she saw his sea of consciousness. She could not see his thoughts, but she could clearly feel that strand of divine sense that did not belong to him. That strand of divine sense was very faint, but also very tenacious and very cunning. It hid in the deepest part of Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness, quietly lying on the bottom of the sea with those rocks formed from his subconscious. Not to mention Chun Changsheng himself. Even if it was her, if it wasn't for her sudden desire to look at Chun Changsheng tonight and attempt to find something in his face and eyes to confirm or deny her conjecture, she wouldn't have been able to discover that extremely fine divine sense. Who would be so daring to attack him? She looked at that strand of divine sense in the depths of Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness and gave a cold snort. With this cold snort, a strand of her divine sense entered Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness. Of course, this was only an extremely small portion of her entire divine sense. Otherwise, with the strength of her divine sense, the moment it entered Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness, his head would probably explode and he would die. Even so, when that strand of divine sense entered, Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness still fell into a violent storm. Countless huge waves were constantly generated, countless bubbles appeared on the surface of the sea, and even the deepest part of the sea was affected. That strand of divine sense that had invaded Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness had been hidden at the bottom of the sea for who knew how long. At this time, it could no longer disguise itself. Along with the great waves that reached deep into the sea, the surrounding seawater was instantly dyed red. An incomparably terrifying stench of blood flooded the world. Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness seemed to become a sea of blood. This hidden strand of divine sense, after appearing in Tibet, was actually so powerful. One could imagine, if it wasn't discovered in advance, how easy would it be for the owner of this strand of divine sense to secretly kill Chun Changsheng one day? Even now, that strand of divine sense still wanted to kill Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng still didn't know anything. His sea of consciousness was currently experiencing countless storms. Under the violent storms, the color of blood gradually spread towards the horizon. But he didn't realize it himself. He just felt a little absent-minded. Fortunately, she was sitting in front of him. Whether Chun Changsheng was that person or not, it was still her business. She wouldn't allow anyone else to touch it, even if it was her own dog that attacked Chun Changsheng. That's right. In the instant that strand of divine sense floated up along with the seawater, she knew who planted this strand of divine sense in Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness, because that bloody scent was too clear, too pungent. She dipped her hand into the bowl and dipped it into the tea. Chun Changsheng absent-mindedly felt as though he had returned to a long time ago. At that time, She had dipped her finger in tea and written the word ice on the stone table, helping him find New North Bridge and thus finding the Black Dragon. But this time, she wasn't going to write. She flicked her finger, and a drop of tea fell on Chun Changsheng's forehead. With a sizzling sound, the drop of tea turned into white smoke and disappeared without a trace. Chun Changsheng only felt a buzzing sound in his sea of consciousness and fainted just like that. At the same time that the drop of tea fell on Chun Changsheng's forehead, in that mansion in the alley of the Northern Military Department, a teacup fell to the ground, shattering into pieces. Zhou Tong's hand froze in the air, his face abnormally pale, as if he had contracted a serious illness in an extremely short period of time. Then his hand began to tremble, and soon after his entire body began to tremble. The surface of his crimson official's gown, because of the trembling, was slightly warped, resembling a sea of blood blown by the wind. Just a moment ago, he had steeped a bowl of very good black tea. When the temperature was right and he was about to drink it, he didn't expect his sea of consciousness to suddenly feel an extremely intense pain. That pain was so real, as if someone had used a rusty knife to stab into the depths of his brain. Even he was unable to endure this pain. His fingers loosened, causing the teacup to fall to the ground. Only he, who had dealt with pain for half his life, could still sit in his chair at this moment. Although his face was pale and his body was trembling, as if he was suffering from a terrible illness, at least he hadn't fainted. In the instant that his sea of consciousness was in pain, Zhou Tong knew what had happened. On that day in the small courtyard where the crabapple blossoms had bloomed, he had borrowed the sinister pressure of Zhou prison, not sparing any effort to use a technique to conceal a strand of his spiritual sense in the depths of Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness. The great crimson gown was truly worthy of being called the most bizarre of consciousness-type attacks. He had done this so silently that neither Chun Changsheng nor Tang 36 had noticed. But even the most powerful and bizarre consciousness-type attacks would still be limited. Zhou Tong's great crimson gown could not allow him to constantly investigate the situation in Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness. It was more like a spy, hidden in the plains behind the enemy lines, recording everything it saw. Later on, when Zhou Tong withdrew that strand of spiritual sense, he would know just what Chun Changsheng had encountered in the last few days, just who it was. Of course, that strand of spiritual sense that was like a roaming cavalryman could, at certain special moments, launch a suicidal attack against the generals in the enemy camp. This was also a method that Zhou Tong had prepared. He wanted to control Chun Changsheng's life and death with a single thought. But he had not expected that a strand of spiritual sense would actually be discovered by someone and even directly obliterated by that person. The obliteration of that strand of spiritual sense had a direct backlash against his sea of consciousness, inflicting severe injuries on him. Who was it? Who could discover that strand of spiritual sense hidden in the depths of Chun Changsheng's sea of consciousness? And who had such a powerful divine ability that could so easily obliterate his great crimson gown? Zhou Tong's face was very pale, his eyes bloodshot, shocked, and confused. With a chill, he thought to himself, could it be the Pope? There were very few people in the world that could see through his great crimson gown's secret technique, and only a scant few people in the capital. The Pope was naturally one of them. It was just that he had made the appropriate arrangements to hide it from the Pope's eyes. So how could the Pope see through it? When Chun Changsheng woke up, he realized that he had fallen asleep on the stone table. He raised his head and saw that the middle-aged woman had left at some point. The teapot and teacups on the stone table had vanished without a trace, as had the black goat. The night forest to the 100-herb garden was still so serene and beautiful, the cheerful cries of insects echoing everywhere. This place was so quiet and beautiful that it seemed like a dream. He really did feel like he had just been dreaming. He had not met the middle-aged woman by the pond, nor had he followed her to the 100-herb garden, nor had he sat across from her to drink tea. He subconsciously extended his hand to touch the space between his eyebrows and realized that his hand was somewhat damp and cool. He drew back his finger and glanced at it, but he could not confirm that it was that drop of tea. But that damp and cool feeling was especially good, seeping into his heart from the space between his eyebrows, making him feel incomparably refreshed. For some reason, he felt much more relaxed, much more clear-headed, as if his body had been carefully washed from the inside out, leaving not a single filth behind. After returning to the Orthodox Academy from the 100 Herb Garden, Chun Chang Sheng thought of his previous encounter and felt somewhat uneasy. He began to meditate under the great banyan tree and began to examine himself. But he did not discover anything strange. Whether it was his ethereal palace, his sea of consciousness, or his meridians, they were all the same as before. Those severed meridians were still blocked. His true essence had not been damaged. His spiritual sense had not grown stronger. Only, there seemed to be a different chi. If his previous spiritual sense could be said to be as tranquil as water and as heavy as a mountain, then it was as if it had been washed by the spring rain. The surface of the water was much livelier and the mountains much wetter. Was it the change brought about by that drop of tea? Chun Chang Sheng did not know, nor could he understand. He sat in a daze under the tree by the lake for a very long time, before getting up and leaving. Returning to the small building, he went to Zhixio's room, as usual, inserting a golden needle into the neck, gently transferring true essence, aiding in the dispersion of the medicinal effects. There were only a few methods of treatment. After so many days of treatment, with Chun Chang Shang's medical expertise, as well as the spiritual medicines that he had obtained from the Li Palace and stolen from the 100 Herb Garden, Zhixio's body had already greatly improved. A few days ago, he was able to walk a few steps while supported, but he still continued to lie in bed for long periods of time. Unless absolutely necessary, he would not even turn over. Xian Yuan had once expressed his confusion about this, but only Chun Chang Sheng knew the reason. The dark times of Zhou prison had left far too many wounds on Zhixio's body. Those wounds had gradually healed on the surface, but the pain still remained within his body. Wounds were pain, and the term wound and pain had never been able to be separated. If there was any movement, Zhixio would feel a terrifying pain, so much so that the wolf youth famed for his willpower would rather appear like a good-for-nothing and lie motionless on the bed. Chun Chang Sheng knew how much pain Zhixio was in, so he did not believe him to be a good-for-nothing. On the contrary, every time he saw Zhixio's expressionless face, he would sigh in admiration at Zhixio's ability to endure until now, not crying or screaming. Once the meridians have completely healed, we can invite the priests of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green to come and use the sacred light technique. Chun Chang Sheng took the golden needle from Zhixio's body and said this with some relief. Suddenly, his fingers stopped moving. At this moment, his thumb and forefinger were pinching the last golden needle in Zhixio's neck. He was keenly aware that below the golden needle was an important meridian shared by both humans and demi-humans. It stretched from 3 li of the ethereal palace all the way to the lower edge of the sea of consciousness. After Zhixio had been imprisoned in Zhou prison, the first thing Zhou Tong had done was to use a secret technique to directly sever that meridian and cripple his cultivation. That meridian was far too important and far too sensitive, let alone actually touching it. Just lightly brushing it with one's spiritual sense would make one feel uncomfortable. If one were to really touch it, that kind of pain, Chun Chang Sheng could only imagine. Of all the people he knew, only Zhixio had ever endured such pain. So every time he placed a needle there, he would be especially careful and conservative. He was keenly aware that the recovery of that meridian could not rely on any external force, only time. As a result, he had never given Zhixio any time for his complete recovery, even mentally preparing himself for 3 years or even longer. Yet, just when he was prepared to remove the golden needle, he suddenly felt a faint ripple coming from below the needle.